Hello, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. Tonight we're stepping into the quiet, mysterious world of plants, a place where leaves listen, roots explore, and trees just might be talking behind our backs. It's a slow-motion universe filled with light, chemistry, and clever little tricks that unfold one patient moment at a time. I hope this video isn't too interesting, though if it does happen to keep you awake, at least you'll be learning something fascinating in the process. Not the worst way to spend a sleepless night. Before we begin, if you enjoy drifting off to the gentle hum of science, I'd be very grateful if you tap the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more sleepy minds find their way here. And while you're settling in, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Feel free to share it in the comments. It's always wonderful to see how far these quiet little journeys reach. So, get cozy. Let your shoulders relax. Let your thoughts slow down like a time-lapse of a sunflower turning toward the morning light. And just a soft reminder before we begin, this video is for educational and relaxation purposes only. It's not intended as medical advice, a cure for insomnia, or a replacement for speaking kindly to your houseplants, though that last one is always encouraged. Let's begin. Plants are easy to underestimate. They don't pace or pounce, they don't bark, blink or scurry off into the underbrush. They just sit there, quietly, greenly. But if you take a closer look, really stop and notice, you'll find that plants are not just passive decorations in the background of life. They're astonishingly complex, beautifully structured and incredibly resourceful. Their bodies, although slow-moving and silent to our eyes, are finely tuned systems built for survival, adaptation, and subtle interaction with the world around them. Let's begin, appropriately, with the basics. What exactly is a plant made of? More specifically, how does its body function in a world where moving an inch per day is considered quite athletic? To start, plants are made up of three main organs: roots, stems, and leaves. These parts work together in an elegant, interdependent dance of water, nutrients, sunlight, and growth. Though they may seem simple on the outside, each of these parts performs a suite of tasks that keep the plant alive and thriving. Roots are the unsung heroes of the plant world. Hidden underground, they anchor the plant in place, soaking up water and minerals from the soil like an ever-thirsty sponge. But they don't just sit there absorbing. They explore. Roots can sense gravity, moisture gradients, and even physical barriers. They grow toward nutrients and away from toxins, and when they encounter obstacles in the soil, they make choices, branching around rocks, slowing down in compacted earth, or sending signals upward to adjust growth strategies above ground. A single tree, like an old oak or a slender birch, can have a root system that extends outwards far beyond the canopy, sometimes up to 2 or 3 times wider than the tree is tall. That underground architecture is complex, sprawling and responsive. In some cases, the roots of neighbouring plants even fuse together, forming natural grafts that allow them to share resources. And then there's the stem, or more broadly the shoot system. This is the above-ground structure that includes stems, branches, flowers and fruit. The stem has a few key roles. It holds up the plant's leaves to the light. It transports fluids and nutrients between the roots and leaves, and in many cases it serves as a storage system, like in the thick, water-filled stems of cacti, or the carbohydrate-rich stalks of sugarcane. Inside the stem, 2 main transport systems run like biological highways. These are the xylem and the phloem. The xylem carries water and minerals upward from the roots to the leaves. It's a one-way street powered by the remarkable process of transpiration, where water evaporates from the leaves and pulls more up from below, almost like sipping through a straw made of living tissue. The phloem, on the other hand, is more like a two-way street. It transports sugars and other organic molecules created during photosynthesis down from the leaves to the rest of the plant. This allows nutrients to be delivered to the growing tips, storage organs, and roots. Think of it as the plant's postal service, quietly shuttling energy around to wherever it's needed most. But the stars of the show are arguably the leaves. Leaves are marvels of natural engineering. They are designed to capture sunlight, absorb carbon dioxide from the air, and produce glucose through the process of photosynthesis. Their flat, broad surfaces maximize exposure to sunlight, while tiny pores on their undersides, called stomata, allow gases to enter and exit in a tightly regulated exchange. These stomata can open and close depending on conditions like humidity, temperature, and carbon dioxide levels, helping the plant conserve water while still breathing. Inside the leaf, chloroplasts, those little green organelles, work tirelessly. They contain chlorophyll, the pigment that gives plants their green colour and captures energy from sunlight. With sunlight, carbon dioxide and water, the chloroplasts perform photosynthesis, converting light energy into chemical energy that powers the entire plant, and, incidentally, produces oxygen as a byproduct, something the rest of us are quite grateful for. If you look closely at the shape and structure of leaves across different plant species, you'll see an incredible variety of forms, each adapted to its environment. Needles on conifers like pine trees reduce surface area to conserve water in cold, dry climates. Broad banana leaves capture maximum light in tropical jungles. The fleshy leaves of succulents store water in arid deserts. Each shape tells a story about the environment in which the plant lives and how it has solved the puzzle of staying alive there. And this architecture isn't static. Plants are capable of something called phenotypic plasticity, which is a fancy way of saying they can adjust their body form in response to their surroundings. A single species of plant might grow tall and leggy in the shade, or short and bushy in full sun, depending on how much light it gets. Roots will grow deeper in dry soil, or spread wide when nutrients are scarce. These aren't conscious choices, of course, but they're far from random. It's all part of a finely tuned feedback loop between the plant and its environment. Some plants have evolved especially unusual body parts for very specific purposes. Take tendrils, for instance, the thin, spiraled structures on climbing plants like peas or grapes. These act like plant fingers, wrapping around supports and helping the plant reach upward toward the light. Or consider the thorns on a rose bush, or the spines of a cactus. These are modified leaves or stems that serve a defensive purpose, keeping would-be grazers at bay. And then there are tubers and bulbs, underground storage units. A potato, for example, is a swollen underground stem packed with energy reserves. It may not look like much, but it's a sophisticated survival tool, allowing the plant to endure tough seasons and grow again when the time is right. Onions, garlic, and tulips use similar strategies, storing energy in bulbs for a rainy day, or rather, a sunny spring. Of course, no discussion of plant bodies would be complete without mentioning flowers. These reproductive structures are as practical as they are beautiful. Petals, often brightly coloured and aromatic, are designed to attract pollinators. Bees, birds, bats, beetles, even the occasional wind gust. Inside the flower, pollen is produced and transferred to other plants to allow fertilization, which leads to the formation of seeds and fruit. Fruit, biologically speaking, is simply a mature ovary. But evolution has dressed it up in all sorts of appealing ways to encourage animals, including humans, to help disperse seeds. From the sticky burrs that cling to your socks, to the juicy berries we snack on, plants have developed countless strategies to send their next generation out into the world. Even within a single plant's lifetime, there's an immense amount of flexibility and subtlety in how its body develops. Many plants exhibit what's called indeterminate growth, meaning they can continue to grow as long as conditions allow. Unlike animals, whose body plans are largely fixed after a certain age, plants keep building new structures, new leaves, new stems, new roots, throughout their lives, and they do it all with a kind of quiet elegance. No nerves, no muscles, no central brain, just a network of cells, communicating chemically and physically, adapting to the world with slow, deliberate changes. If you speed up time, say, through a time-lapse camera, the full choreography becomes visible. You'd see leaves turning to follow the sun, roots weaving through the earth, flowers opening with a slow-motion sigh. It's a silent symphony of motion, just played in a different key. So while a plant might not wag its tail or come when called, it's very much alive. Its body is busy sensing, building and balancing, using a toolkit refined over hundreds of millions of years. In many ways, the plant body is an engineer's dream, self-building, solar-powered, and able to recycle its own parts. It can filter air, anchor soil, make sugar out of sunlight, and create its own food without ever leaving the house. And perhaps most wonderfully, it does all of this without needing to be in a hurry. There's no rush, no panic, just a steady reaching for the sun, a slow stretching of cells, and a calm, quiet confidence in being exactly where it needs to be. Now that's a body worth appreciating. If you've ever looked at a potted plant and thought, well, it's nice, but it's not exactly thinking about anything, you're not alone. For centuries, plants were seen as little more than passive green machines, sunlight in, oxygen out, and not much going on in between. But recent research has been quietly shaking up that perception. It turns out that plants are far more aware of their surroundings than we once believed. They don't have brains or nervous systems like animals do, but they can sense, respond, remember, and even make decisions in ways that challenge our traditional ideas of intelligence. Let's start with a word that tends to raise eyebrows: plant intelligence. It sounds like the title of a children's science fiction novel, but it's actually a serious field of study. Researchers have been exploring whether plants possess something akin to a distributed intelligence, a system of information processing spread throughout their tissues, rather than centralized in a brain. This doesn't mean that plants are thinking deep thoughts about the meaning of life or composing poetry in chlorophyll, but it does mean they're remarkably good at solving problems, adapting to challenges, and making strategic decisions. One of the first clues to this came from experiments with climbing plants. Let's take the humble pea plant. When grown near a support, like a stick or a pole, the plant will send out tendrils and begin to curl toward it. That's no surprise, it's what climbing plants do. But researchers noticed something more subtle. If they moved the support, the plant adjusted its growth pattern, and if two supports were offered, one short and close, one tall and far, the plant seemed to evaluate both options before committing, often choosing the one that offered the best long-term support. This isn't just automatic reflex, it's conditional behaviour based on assessment. But how exactly does a plant make a decision without a brain? Well, plants use complex biochemical networks to process information. They have hormones that act as messengers, signalling molecules that travel through their tissues, and even electrical impulses that move from cell to cell. In fact, some plants have been shown to transmit electrical signals at speeds similar to those found in animal nerves, albeit without actual neurons. One famous example involves the mimosa plant, Mimosa pudica, sometimes known as the sensitive plant because of its dramatic response to touch. If you gently tap one of its leaves, it folds up almost instantly, a kind of botanical flinch. Scientists once thought this was just a mechanical reaction. But in a series of clever experiments, researchers dropped mimosa plants from a short height, repeatedly, without causing physical damage. At first, the plants folded their leaves in response as expected, but over time they stopped reacting. They had learned that the drop wasn't harmful, and they stopped wasting energy on unnecessary responses. What's more, they retained this memory for several weeks. The plants had essentially remembered an experience and adjusted their behaviour accordingly. This kind of habituation, a decrease in response to a repeated harmless stimulus, is a basic form of learning, and yet it occurred in an organism with no brain, no neurons, and no traditional memory centres. Another intriguing example comes from experiments with maze-like environments. In one study, scientists placed plants in a Y-shaped chamber with a light source at one end. The plants consistently grew toward the light, as you'd expect, but then the light was removed and replaced with a fan. The fan alone doesn't benefit the plant, but during training it had been paired with the light. And now, in the absence of the light, the plant still grew toward the fan, In other words, the plant had learned to associate the fan with the light, a process strikingly similar to classical conditioning in animals. Now, before we start awarding honorary diplomas to philodendrons, let's be clear. Plant intelligence is different from animal intelligence. Plants don't have consciousness in the way we do. They don't have internal narratives, self-awareness, or little green thoughts floating through their imaginary minds. What they do have is an incredible ability to sense, analyze, and react to their surroundings, all using systems entirely their own. One of those systems is chemical communication. Plants are masters of chemical messaging. They release compounds into the air and the soil, often in astonishingly specific ways. If a leaf is chewed on by an insect, the plant can release airborne chemicals that signal other parts of the same plant, and even neighbouring plants, to prepare for attack. These warning signals can trigger the production of bitter or toxic compounds that make the leaves less tasty to would-be grazers. In some species, the signal is so specific that it can identify the type of attacker. A tomato plant being nibbled by caterpillars, for instance, will produce different chemicals than one being poked by aphids. These chemical warnings aren't just random distress calls, they're targeted messages shaped by millions of years of evolutionary arms races. But perhaps even more impressive is how plants can decide how to allocate their resources. Imagine you're a sunflower growing in a crowded field. To your left, there's shade. To your right, there's more sunlight, but also a taller plant. You can't move from your spot, but you can adjust your growth. So you lean slightly toward the light, stretch your stem to rise above your neighbour, and reroute energy from root growth to support your towering ambition. These decisions aren't made by a tiny green executive somewhere inside the stalk. They're the result of decentralized feedback systems, chemical signals that say, "There's more light over here," or "The soil's a bit dry over there," and the plant's tissues respond accordingly. It's less like a brain making choices, and more like 1,000 tiny sensors adjusting the sails on a very quiet ship. Even root growth is astonishingly strategic. Roots don't just grow randomly through the soil. They explore, they compare, and they remember. If a root encounters a patch of nutrient-rich soil, it branches out, maximizing absorption. If it hits a dry or toxic area, it diverts. Some studies have shown that roots can even recognize their own kin, plants of the same species, and behave less competitively when growing near them. When surrounded by strangers, they may expand more aggressively, seeking to outcompete. When surrounded by relatives, they tend to play nice. This kin recognition hints at a kind of social awareness, albeit a very different one from ours. It's not emotional, but it is responsive. Plants also respond to the presence of other plants through light detection. They can sense changes in the ratio of red to far red light, which tells them whether they're being shaded by others. If they detect too much far red light, an indicator that taller neighbours are blocking sunlight, they ramp up stem elongation in an attempt to get ahead. In this way, plants are locked in slow-motion duels with their neighbours, subtly shifting shape and strategy based on minute changes in light and chemical signals. It's not aggressive exactly, but it's definitely competitive. There's also growing evidence that plants exhibit what some researchers call anticipatory behaviour. That is, they don't just react, they prepare. In fluctuating environments, some plants have been shown to anticipate the return of regular stressors, like drought or grazing, and adjust their internal chemistry in advance. This isn't quite memory in the human sense, but it's memory-like. A biological record of past events that influences future behaviour. This brings us to perhaps the most fascinating concept of all, distributed intelligence. Unlike animals, which rely on a central nervous system, plants process information in a decentralized way. Every root tip, every leaf cell, every growth point is both a sensor and a responder. There's no command center. Instead, intelligence is spread throughout the organism like a network. It's a bit like a democracy of cells, where decisions emerge from the collective input of many parts rather than a single bossy brain. And in some ways, this makes plants incredibly resilient. If an animal's brain is damaged, the whole system can fail. But if a plant loses a branch, or even most of its body, it can often recover, regrow, and reconfigure itself. Its intelligence is not tied to any one location, it's built into the structure of its being. So the next time you pass a tree or water your houseplant, consider this. You're looking at a living system that senses, responds, evaluates, and adapts. It might not wave hello or compose a haiku, but it knows more about its world than we give it credit for. It remembers where the sun comes up. It knows when danger is near. It chooses where to grow and when to wait. Intelligence, it turns out, comes in many forms, some of them green, some of them silent, and some of them swaying gently in the breeze, outsmarting the world one slow decision at a time. If you could shrink yourself down and slip into the soil beneath your feet, you'd find yourself in a bustling underground metropolis, one that's humming with life, filled with signals, trade routes, alliances, and even a bit of subterfuge. Despite the stillness we see above ground, the root systems of plants form vast, dynamic networks that reach out, communicate, and interact with the world and with each other in surprisingly sophisticated ways. Roots are more than just thirsty tentacles searching for water. They are the plant's foundation, both physically and biologically. They anchor the organism in place, absorb nutrients, and serve as a frontline sensor array, constantly tasting the soil and reporting back. But they also interact with other roots, microorganisms, fungi, and chemicals in the soil in ways that begin to look an awful lot like social behavior. One of the most fascinating aspects of root biology is how plants work with fungi. Not just any fungi, mind you, but special ones that live in a deeply entwined partnership with plant roots. These are known as mycorrhizal fungi, and they form what's called a mutualistic symbiosis. In simpler terms, both parties benefit from the relationship. The fungi wrap themselves around, or sometimes even into, the plant's roots, creating an interface through which nutrients can be exchanged. The fungi deliver hard-to-reach minerals, especially phosphorus and nitrogen, from the surrounding soil. In return, the plant pays them in sugar, glucose produced through photosynthesis in its leaves and delivered down into the roots. It's a cozy, long-term trade agreement, and it's incredibly common. In fact, scientists estimate that over 90% of all land plants engage in some form of mycorrhizal relationship. Without fungi, many plants would struggle to gather enough nutrients, especially in poor soils, and without plants, the fungi would lack their main energy source. This partnership forms the backbone of what some scientists have dubbed the Wood Wide Web. It's a vast underground communication and resource-sharing network that connects not just individual plants, but entire communities. Through their fungal partners, trees and other plants can pass chemical signals and even share nutrients with their neighbours. Imagine a forest full of trees. Each one is a towering individual, but below ground their roots and fungal networks are intertwined. If one tree is attacked by insects or begins to dry out from drought, it may send warning signals through the fungal network. Nearby trees, upon receiving the alert, can prepare by boosting their own chemical defences or closing their stomata to conserve water. It's not telepathy, it's biology. But it looks remarkably like a community looking out for its own. In some cases, this sharing goes beyond mere warnings. In nutrient-poor conditions, certain trees have been observed transferring sugars or nitrogen to other trees through these fungal connections. Sometimes the recipients are their own seedlings, which makes evolutionary sense. They're helping their genetic offspring survive. But other times, the generosity seems to extend to unrelated neighbours. Older, established trees have even been shown to support young saplings that are shaded and unable to photosynthesize efficiently on their own. These generous elders are often referred to as mother trees. They tend to be large, mature individuals with vast root and fungal networks that extend through the forest floor. Their ability to support other trees may not be entirely altruistic. After all, maintaining a healthy understory can be good for the forest as a whole, and therefore good for the mother tree's own long-term success. But it certainly challenges the idea of plants as strictly self-interested loners. Not all root interactions are so harmonious though. The underground world is just as competitive as it is cooperative. Plants growing in close quarters often compete fiercely for space, water and nutrients. Some will even release chemical compounds into the soil to inhibit the growth of nearby rivals, a process known as allelopathy. Black walnut trees are notorious for this. Their roots exude a compound called juglone, which is toxic to many other plant species. This gives the walnut tree a competitive edge by reducing the number of rivals that can grow nearby. It's a bit like throwing shade at your neighbours, but chemically. Even among kin, the level of cooperation can vary. While some plants seem to recognise their relatives and dial down their competitive behaviours, others ramp up the rivalry if resources are scarce. It's a complex dance of competition and cooperation, with the outcome shaped by context, species, and environmental conditions. Roots are also sensory organs in their own right. They can detect gradients of water, nutrient concentrations, soil texture, pH levels, and even mechanical barriers like rocks or compacted earth. If you were to watch a root grow in time-lapse, you'd see it exploring, probing, pausing, and redirecting, almost like a curious worm feeling its way forward. This process isn't random. Roots grow toward areas of higher nutrient content and water availability, and they avoid toxic or barren zones. There's even evidence that roots can listen. In controlled experiments, scientists have exposed plants to the sound of running water, without any actual water present, and found that roots grow toward the sound. This suggests that plants can detect vibrations and use them to guide their growth. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but it likely involves tiny mechanoreceptors, cells that respond to pressure or movement, distributed along the root surface. In some experiments, roots were also able to detect the presence of other roots nearby, even before physically touching them. They seem to respond differently depending on whether the neighbouring root belonged to the same plant, a genetic relative, or a completely unrelated individual. This suggests a level of recognition and response that's hard to dismiss as coincidence. Roots also play a central role in plant immune systems. When a pathogen is detected in the soil, the roots can mount a defence response, releasing antimicrobial compounds, altering their growth patterns, or even calling in help from beneficial microbes. Some plants maintain symbiotic relationships not only with fungi, but also with bacteria, which assist with nitrogen fixation or defence against disease. In legumes like peas and beans, special structures called root nodules house nitrogen-fixing bacteria that convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form the plant can use. It's a tidy little factory underground, working full-time to keep the plant fed. This kind of biological teamwork isn't just fascinating, it's essential for ecosystems. The health of entire forests, grasslands, and even deserts often hinges on what's happening below the surface. If the root systems and their microbial partners are thriving, the plants above are more resilient to drought, disease, and environmental stress. But when these underground networks are disrupted by soil compaction, pollution, or deforestation, the entire ecosystem can falter. In agricultural settings, this understanding has led to a resurgence of interest in soil health. Farmers and gardeners are paying closer attention to how tilling, fertilizing, and pesticide use affect the underground world. Practices like crop rotation, cover cropping, and reduced tillage help preserve root networks and support beneficial fungi and bacteria. In a way, it's a return to a more respectful partnership with the soil, recognizing that what we do above ground echoes below. The complexity of these underground networks has even inspired new technologies. Scientists and engineers are studying root systems and fungal networks as models for decentralized systems like internet architecture and robotics. After all, a network that can grow, adapt, reroute, and self-repair without any central control is a pretty compelling blueprint. But beyond the scientific implications, there's something quietly profound about knowing that under every forest path, garden bed, and city park, there's a living web of roots and fungi, whispering to each other, passing notes, sharing meals, and occasionally engaging in a bit of strategic sabotage. It's a reminder that the world beneath our feet is just as alive and interconnected as the world we see above. So the next time you walk through a patch of grass or sit beneath a tree, remember, you're standing on top of a vast, invisible network of relationships, rooted in cooperation, rivalry, communication, and memory. It may be silent, it may be hidden, but it is never still. It's easy to think of plants as passive bystanders in the sensory world. They don't have eyes, ears, or noses, no fingers to touch with, no tongues to taste. But what if that's only because we're looking for our own senses in all the wrong places? While plants lack the organs we associate with perception, they've developed their own suite of sophisticated ways to gather information from the world around them. They can detect light, gravity, touch, temperature, moisture, and even sound. They can sense when they're being nibbled on, when their neighbours are nearby, and when the days are getting longer or shorter. In fact, plants may be some of the most observant organisms on Earth, just on a time scale and wavelength we're not used to noticing. Let's begin with sight, or at least something quite like it. While plants don't have eyes, they're extremely good at detecting light. Not just whether it's present, but how much there is, what angle it's coming from, how long it lasts, and even its colour. This is thanks to a range of light-sensitive proteins that act like internal photoreceptors. One of the key players is a group of proteins called phytochromes. These molecules can detect red and far-red light, and they help plants determine the quality of the light they're receiving. Why is that useful? Well, when light passes through a canopy, the red wavelengths are absorbed by the upper leaves, while the far-red wavelengths pass through. If a plant detects a higher ratio of far-red light, it knows it's being shaded by other plants, and it responds by growing taller in a bid to reach the sunlight. This is why many young plants seem to stretch toward the light if they're in crowded conditions, a phenomenon known as shade avoidance. They're not just growing randomly, they're interpreting the quality of the light and making architectural decisions accordingly. Plants also use other photoreceptors like cryptochromes and phototropins to detect blue light, which helps regulate everything from seedling development to stomatal opening to leaf positioning. That's right. Leaves adjust themselves to optimize exposure to sunlight. In some species, they even track the movement of the sun across the sky in a process called heliotropism. Imagine a sunflower's face slowly turning east to west, following the golden arc of the sun. It's not just for dramatic effect, it's a very real solar tracking strategy to maximize photosynthesis. Then there's the question of circadian rhythms. Just like humans and animals, plants have internal clocks that run on roughly 24-hour cycles. These circadian rhythms allow them to anticipate changes in the environment, such as sunrise and sunset. Even when kept in total darkness, plants continue to follow these rhythms for several days, suggesting that their sense of time is deeply ingrained. These internal clocks help regulate processes like leaf movement, flower opening, and hormone production. For example, some plants open their flowers at specific times of day to align with the activity patterns of their preferred pollinators. Others close their stomata at night to conserve water when photosynthesis isn't taking place. It's a quiet, invisible rhythm, but it governs much of a plant's daily life. Now let's talk about touch. While plants can't reach out and feel things the way we can, they're highly sensitive to physical contact. This ability is known as thigmotropism. You can see it in action when a vine wraps itself around a trellis, or when a tendril curls after brushing against a surface. The speed and direction of this movement vary depending on the species and the stimulus, but the underlying mechanism is the same. Mechanical stimulation triggers a cascade of biochemical signals that cause cells on one side of the structure to grow faster than the other, creating a bend. Perhaps the most famous example of touch sensitivity in plants is the mimosa, Mimosa pudica. If you brush against its leaves, they fold inward almost instantly. This rapid movement is driven by changes in turgor pressure, the pressure of water inside plant cells. Specialized cells at the base of the leaflets suddenly lose water, causing them to collapse and the leaf to fold. This reaction may help deter herbivores or shake off small insects, and the plant can recover and reopen its leaves within minutes. Some carnivorous plants also respond quickly to touch. The Venus flytrap, for instance, has tiny trigger hairs on the inside of its leaf lobes. When an unsuspecting insect brushes against these hairs twice, within about 20 seconds the trap snaps shut. This is a form of mechanosensation, and it's surprisingly precise. The plant doesn't waste energy on false alarms. Only a genuine repeated touch will activate the trap. But touch isn't the only way plants detect movement. There's emerging evidence that plants can also sense sound. Yes, sound. While they don't have ears, they can respond to vibrations in the air and soil. In laboratory studies, roots have been shown to grow toward the sound of running water, even when no moisture is present. Other studies suggest that plants can distinguish between different frequencies of sound and alter their growth or chemical production in response. This might sound like science fiction, but the logic is grounded in physics. Sound is just vibration, and plants are full of mechanoreceptors that can detect pressure changes. Some researchers believe this sensitivity could help plants locate underground water sources or respond to the chewing sounds of herbivores. Imagine a leaf quietly listening for the tiny crunch of caterpillar jaws. Speaking of chewed leaves, that brings us to one of the most remarkable ways plants sense their environment: chemical detection. Plants are constantly sampling the air and the soil for chemical cues. They release volatile organic compounds, small molecules that float through the air, and detect them through their own receptors. When one plant is attacked by a herbivore, it often releases a cloud of warning chemicals into the air. Nearby plants, upon detecting these signals, begin to ramp up their own defenses by producing bitter compounds, thickening their leaves, or even summoning predatory insects that feed on the attackers. There's a kind of chemical gossip. Danger! Aphids at table 2. This eavesdropping can happen between plants of the same species or between entirely different species. Some plants are even selective about who they listen to. Studies have shown that sagebrush plants are more likely to respond to chemical signals from genetically related individuals than from strangers. Others, like tobacco plants, seem to respond more effectively to local dialects of chemical language than to foreign ones. And these responses aren't just defensive. Some plants can detect the presence of neighbouring plants before they touch or shade each other, simply by detecting the chemicals released by nearby roots. They might then alter their own root architecture, adjust their growth direction, or change how they allocate resources between stems and leaves. It's a subtle but strategic form of communication, like politely stepping aside before someone else reaches for the same cup of tea. Gravity is another cue that plants are constantly monitoring. This is known as gravitropism. Roots typically grow downward, guided by gravity, while shoots grow upward. Inside the plant cells are tiny structures called statoliths, little starch-filled organelles that settle in response to gravity, providing a directional signal. If you tilt a potted plant on its side, it won't stay that way for long. Within hours or days, the stem will curve upward again, correcting its orientation. Some plants use this ability in quite creative ways. For example, certain seeds that fall to the ground in awkward positions can reorient themselves as they sprout. They feel which way is down and adjust their early growth to ensure that roots go underground and shoots head skyward. It's all part of their instinctive programming, shaped by millions of years of trial and error. Plants also sense moisture with great precision. Roots can grow toward areas of higher water concentration, a behavior known as hydrotropism. This makes perfect sense. A root that can find water is a root that keeps the plant alive. But what's astonishing is how accurately roots can detect tiny gradients in moisture, sometimes just a few % different from one side of a root tip to another. They're like living divining rods, tuning in to the subtle whispers of damp soil. Even temperature doesn't escape the plant's attention. Many plants require a period of cold before they will flower, a process known as vernalization. It's nature's way of ensuring that flowering doesn't happen too early, when frost might still be a threat. Some seeds also use temperature cues to determine when to germinate. Others rely on a combination of temperature, moisture, and light to break dormancy, ensuring that they sprout only when conditions are just right. Altogether, this suite of senses gives plants a remarkably detailed picture of their environment. They may not see with eyes, or hear with ears, or sniff with noses, but they sense the world with a quiet, distributed intelligence that rivals many animals in sensitivity and nuance. It's not the kind of perception that leads to emotion or memory as we know it, but it is an awareness, a steady, silent monitoring of the world that informs every twitch of a tendril, every curl of a root, every unfurling of a leaf. So the next time you walk past a row of trees or tend to your houseplants, know this: they are not unaware. They are paying attention to the light, the air, the touch of the wind, the moisture in the soil, and maybe even the subtle sound of your footsteps. They are rooted in place but not disconnected. They are still but not silent, and they are listening always in their own green and patient way. There's something magical about watching sunlight spill through leaves on a quiet morning. It feels serene, timeless, like the world is quietly recharging. And in a way, it is. Every beam of sunlight that lands on a leaf is more than just light. It's energy, pure and potent, ready to be transformed. The alchemy that plants perform with this sunlight is one of the most elegant and essential processes on Earth. It's called photosynthesis, and it's the reason you, me, whales, hummingbirds, hedgehogs, and donuts all exist. At its core, photosynthesis is how plants turn light energy into chemical energy. They take sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide and use them to create glucose, a sugar molecule that powers just about everything they do. In the process, they release oxygen, which is incredibly generous of them and rather fortunate for the rest of us. Let's look at how this happens. The main actors in this solar-powered drama are the chloroplasts, tiny green organelles inside plant cells. These chloroplasts are filled with chlorophyll, the pigment that gives plants their green colour and the molecule responsible for capturing light energy. Chlorophyll is incredibly good at absorbing the red and blue parts of the light spectrum, while mostly reflecting green light, which is why plants appear green to us. Now, chloroplasts don't just absorb sunlight for fun. When chlorophyll captures light energy, it excites electrons within the molecule, giving them enough energy to hop onto a chain of proteins known as the electron transport chain. Think of it as a tiny, high-speed assembly line inside each chloroplast, buzzing with charged particles and clever chemical tricks. There are two main stages to photosynthesis. The first is the light-dependent reactions, which, as the name suggests, require light. These reactions take place in the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast, which are like little stacks of green pancakes. When chlorophyll absorbs sunlight, it uses that energy to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen is released as a byproduct, floating up through the leaf and eventually out into the air, where it becomes part of your next deep breath. The hydrogen, meanwhile, sticks around in the form of high-energy molecules like ATP and NADPH, which are sort of like the plant's rechargeable batteries. The second stage is called the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent reactions. Despite the name, these don't necessarily happen in the dark. They just don't need light to proceed directly. This part of the process takes place in the stroma, the fluid-filled space around the thylakoid stacks. Here, the plant uses carbon dioxide from the air and the energy from its little ATP and NADPH batteries to build glucose molecules. And glucose, dear listener, is where the real magic lies. Glucose is the starting point for just about everything the plant needs. It can be used right away for energy, stored for later in the form of starch, or turned into cellulose to build cell walls. It's like a universal building block made from sunshine and air. This process, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and converting it into energy-rich sugars, is the foundation of nearly every food chain on Earth. Herbivores eat the plants, carnivores eat the herbivores, and everything ultimately depends on that quiet, chloroplast-powered miracle happening inside a leaf. Now, as simple and elegant as photosynthesis seems, it's also astonishingly efficient and complex. A single large tree might have hundreds of thousands of leaves, each one covered in millions of chloroplasts, each chloroplast packed with stacks of thylakoids. It's a solar farm on a microscopic scale, humming away without wires, screens, or the need for a plug. But plants aren't just passive solar panels. They adjust their photosynthesis depending on conditions. In bright light, they ramp up production. In shade, they slow down. In dry conditions, they might close their stomata, the tiny pores on their leaves, to conserve water, even if that means reducing the intake of carbon dioxide and lowering their photosynthetic output. It's a constant balancing act between energy gain and water loss. Some plants, particularly those in hot and arid environments, have evolved clever variations of the standard photosynthetic process. Most plants follow a method called C3 photosynthesis, named after the 3-carbon compound it produces first. But in hotter climates, where water is scarce and temperatures soar, C3 photosynthesis can become inefficient. The enzyme responsible for grabbing carbon dioxide, called rubisco, gets a bit confused in high temperatures and starts picking up oxygen instead, which wastes energy. To solve this problem, some plants have developed a different approach called C4 photosynthesis. These plants, which include corn and sugarcane, physically separate the stages of carbon fixation and sugar production into different types of cells. This allows them to concentrate carbon dioxide where it's needed and minimize the wasteful side reactions. It's like organizing your kitchen so that the cooking and prep stations are in different rooms. Inefficient in your home, perhaps, but incredibly effective for managing heat and humidity. And then there are cam plants, like cacti and pineapples. These plants only open their stomata at night, when the air is cooler and more humid. They take in carbon dioxide and store it in a special form until daylight returns, at which point they resume photosynthesis while keeping their stomata tightly closed. It's a brilliant strategy for saving water while still getting the job done, and it's a big reason why succulents are so good at surviving in harsh, dry places. Photosynthesis doesn't just support plants, it shapes the entire planet. Over the last few billion years, it has transformed Earth's atmosphere. Early Earth had almost no oxygen. It was the rise of photosynthetic organisms, particularly cyanobacteria, that began pumping oxygen into the air. This led to what scientists call the Great Oxygenation Event, around 2.5 billion years ago, which drastically changed the planet's chemistry and made aerobic life, including us, possible. In a very real sense, the oxygen in every breath you take is a gift from photosynthesis, and not just from plants. Algae and photosynthetic plankton in the oceans play a massive role too. Tiny as they are, these aquatic organisms produce roughly half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. That's right, every other breath you take comes from the sea. Photosynthesis also plays a crucial role in climate regulation. By pulling carbon dioxide from the air, plants help reduce greenhouse gases and moderate global temperatures. Forests, wetlands, and grasslands act as carbon sinks, locking away carbon in their biomass and in the soil. When we cut down forests or burn fossil fuels, we release that stored carbon back into the atmosphere, tipping the balance. This has made photosynthesis a hot topic, figuratively and literally in climate science. Understanding how plants respond to increased carbon dioxide, rising temperatures, and shifting rainfall patterns is essential for predicting how ecosystems will change in the future. It's also why planting trees and protecting natural habitats has become such an important strategy in efforts to combat climate change. But beyond the science and the numbers, there's something deeply beautiful about photosynthesis. It's a quiet, constant miracle. The leaf doesn't boast, the tree doesn't brag, but moment by moment, day by day, plants are capturing sunlight, making sugar, releasing oxygen, and keeping the whole show running. Even in urban environments, photosynthesis is quietly at work. On balconies, in parks, in rooftop gardens and cracks in the pavement, where weeds take root and reach for the light. Every patch of green is a tiny solar engine humming along, keeping the planet habitable and the air fresh. And perhaps most poetic of all is the idea that sunlight, which we can't eat or drink or breathe, is transformed by plants into something we can use. They catch what we cannot hold and turn it into fuel for life. Glucose in an apple, starch in a potato, oxygen in your lungs, all made possible by the silent, invisible labour of leaves. So the next time you sit in a patch of dappled sunlight, or notice the way a tree gently sways in the breeze, take a moment to thank the humble chloroplast. It's a tiny factory that never clocks out, a solar-powered chemist that makes life possible, one photon at a time. Photosynthesis is not just a process, it's a promise that even in stillness, even in silence, something vital and vibrant is always at work. The leaves know how to turn light into life, and they've been doing it for over 3 billion years. Not a bad track record for something we usually walk right past without a second thought. Imagine being a plant. You can't run, you can't hide, and your day job involves standing in one place while all sorts of things nibble, bump, or shade you. And yet, somehow, you survive. Not only that, you thrive. One of the ways plants manage this is through a kind of slow-motion behaviour that, while almost imperceptible to us in real time, reveals a world of movement, strategy, and even communication when sped up. This is the drama of growth, of bending, reaching, curling and unfurling, and it's all powered by something deceptively simple: plant hormones. Just like animals use hormones to regulate growth, development and behaviour, plants rely on their own internal chemical messengers. These substances help plants respond to light, gravity, touch, injury, competition, and countless other environmental signals. But instead of circulating through a bloodstream, plant hormones move through SAP, cell membranes, and the spaces between cells, triggering changes as they go. One of the most famous plant hormones is auxin. If plant hormones were a pop band, auxin would be the lead singer, the one with the big hair and the spotlight. Auxin plays a central role in coordinating growth and is especially important in phototropism, which is the tendency of plants to grow toward light. You've probably seen this in action when a houseplant leans dramatically toward a window, as if trying to escape the living room altogether. Here's how it works. Auxin is produced in the tips of growing shoots. When light shines on one side of the plant, auxin redistributes itself to the shaded side. This imbalance causes the cells on the darker side to elongate more than those on the light side, making the plant bend toward the light source. It's a subtle adjustment, but over time, it adds up to a very deliberate-looking movement. Auxin also helps guide root growth. Roots respond to gravity by growing downward, a behaviour called gravitropism. When a plant is tilted, auxin again shifts to one side, in this case, the lower side of the root. But here, auxin has the opposite effect. Instead of promoting cell elongation, it slows it down. This causes the upper side of the root to grow more quickly than the lower side, bending the root back toward the downward direction. It's a wonderfully simple trick, using the same molecule to do opposite things depending on the tissue. Auxin is a multitasker, involved not just in bending but in root formation, leaf arrangement, fruit development and even wound healing. But auxin doesn't act alone. Plants have a whole cast of hormonal characters. One of them is gibberellin, which sounds like a character from a fantasy novel, but is in fact a powerful growth promoter. Gibberellins help elongate stems, break seed dormancy, and trigger flowering. If auxin is the plant's architect, gibberellins are the contractors, pushing the design upward and outward. Then there are cytokinins, which promote cell division. These hormones work in tandem with auxin, but they often play a counterbalancing role. While auxin encourages root growth, cytokinins encourage shoot growth. The ratio between the two can determine whether a plant puts more energy into growing up or digging down. In a way, it's like internal budgeting. Should we build more leaves or more roots this season? The answer depends on the plant's needs and the environment it's growing in. Another major player is abscisic acid. Despite its name, which suggests it's responsible for leaf drop, or abscission, this hormone is more like the plant's emergency brake. It helps the plant deal with stress, particularly drought. When water is scarce, abscisic acid signals the stomata, those tiny pores on the leaf surface, to close, reducing water loss through evaporation. It also helps seeds stay dormant during unfavourable conditions, delaying germination until the odds of survival improve. Then there's ethylene, a gaseous hormone that acts like the plant's internal clock and social cue. Ethylene helps regulate processes like fruit ripening, flower wilting, and leaf fall. If you've ever left a banana near other fruit and noticed that everything ripens faster, that's ethylene at work. Bananas release ethylene gas, which triggers ripening in nearby produce. It's such a powerful effect that commercial growers often use controlled ethylene exposure to ripen fruit in warehouses before it hits the shelves. Ethylene also plays a role in how plants respond to mechanical stress. When a seedling pushes through the soil and hits resistance, it releases ethylene to modify its growth pattern. Instead of growing tall and slender, which could lead to breakage, it thickens its stem and slows its upward growth, giving it a sturdier build. It's like hitting the gym for some strength training before heading out into the world. These hormones don't act in isolation. They're in constant dialogue, modulating and balancing each other's effects based on the plant's internal needs and external circumstances. It's not a top-down command system, but a fluid, decentralized coordination of signals, more like a jazz band improvising together than a military parade. All of this hormonal chatter results in the many graceful movements we associate with plants. The way a sunflower turns its face toward the morning sun, the way a vine sends out a searching tendril and curls around a fence post, the way leaves droop in the heat of the day and perk up again by evening. These movements, known collectively as tropisms and nastic responses, are slow, subtle, and largely driven by changes in cell growth and water pressure. In phototropism and gravitropism, as we've seen, the plant grows toward or away from a stimulus. But in nastic movements, the response is independent of the direction of the stimulus. For example, the sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica, folds its leaves inward when touched. This isn't a directional growth response, it's a quick turgor movement caused by rapid shifts in water pressure in specialized cells at the base of the leaflets. The result is dramatic and oddly charming, like a bashful leaf pulling a curtain. Some flowers also exhibit nastic movements. Morning glories unfurl in the early light, while others close their petals at dusk. These opening and closing behaviors are often regulated by circadian rhythms, light cues, and temperature, all tied to the plant's internal clock and hormonal state. Even seed germination is a carefully orchestrated performance. When a seed senses the right combination of moisture, temperature, and sometimes light, it begins to awaken. Hormones like gibberellin and abscisic acid play tug-of-war, determining whether the seed should stay dormant or break through its coat and begin to grow. When gibberellin wins the match, enzymes are activated that soften the seed coat and mobilize stored food reserves, allowing the embryonic root to emerge and seek the soil. As the seedling grows, its tiny root and shoot tips begin their own hormonal negotiations, adjusting their paths in response to the environment. Roots grow toward moisture and nutrients. Shoots reach for light. Leaves unfold, chloroplasts rev up, and the whole machinery of photosynthesis comes online. It's the quiet birth of a new green life, choreographed entirely by chemical whispers. And if you think all this growth is mindless or automatic, consider the incredible precision with which plants adjust to changing conditions. A tree growing on a windy hillside will develop thicker bark and stronger branches on the windward side. A plant shaded by a taller neighbour may redirect its energy to lateral growth, finding gaps in the canopy. Even the angle of a leaf can change slightly throughout the day to maximise light capture and minimise water loss. These aren't random changes, they're fine-tuned responses guided by hormones and carried out with incredible elegance. Time-lapse photography has helped us see these movements more clearly. Speed up a plant's life and it becomes a dancer, bending toward the sun, unfurling new leaves, twirling vines, and even swaying in response to unseen signals. It's a reminder that just because something moves slowly doesn't mean it's not moving at all. Plants are in constant motion, just on their own terms, and perhaps that's the most beautiful part. In a world that prizes speed, plants invite us to slow down, to notice the curve of a stem, the patience of a bud waiting to bloom, the way a leaf catches the light. Their growth is both a science and a kind of quiet poetry, written in hormones and cells, unfolding inch by inch in the stillness. So next time you pass by a tree or water your favourite houseplant, take a moment to appreciate the invisible orchestration at play. Every twist of a vine, every stretch toward the sun, every curling petal or drooping leaf is the result of a careful, hormone-driven conversation happening just beneath the surface. It's the secret choreography of life itself, slow, steady, and utterly extraordinary. Plants may not have cell phones or the internet, but that hasn't stopped them from becoming excellent communicators. In fact, plants have been passing messages for hundreds of millions of years, quietly, efficiently, and often without anyone noticing. Their methods are subtle, but surprisingly complex, involving an arsenal of chemical compounds, a flair for timing, and even a bit of strategic deception. It's not gossip in the traditional sense, but it's communication all the same. Warning signals, distress calls, recruitment posters for insect allies, and occasionally some sneaky manipulation of the local wildlife. Let's start with one of the clearest examples of plant communication: chemical warnings. When a plant is under attack, say, by a hungry caterpillar, it doesn't just suffer in silence. It responds by releasing volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, into the air. These are tiny airborne chemicals that drift out from the injured leaves and spread through the surrounding area. To us, they might carry a faint grassy smell, or the scent of freshly broken greenery. But to other plants nearby, they're the equivalent of an emergency broadcast system. Neighbouring plants, upon detecting these VOCs, begin to ramp up their own defences. They might produce bitter or toxic compounds that make them less palatable to herbivores, or thicken their leaves to make chewing more difficult. This response can happen within minutes of receiving the signal. It's not magic, it's biochemistry, and it works remarkably well. One classic example comes from wild tobacco plants. When a tobacco plant is attacked by caterpillars, it releases a specific blend of VOCs that not only warns nearby tobacco plants, but also attracts predatory insects like parasitic wasps. These wasps are natural enemies of the caterpillars, and they follow the chemical trail straight to the buffet. The plant, in effect, has called in air support. But here's where things get even more interesting. The chemical messages plants send are often highly specific. A tobacco plant being eaten by caterpillars will produce a different chemical signal than one attacked by beetles. Some plants can even distinguish between mechanical damage, like a broken leaf, and biological attack. Simply snipping a leaf with scissors won't trigger the same chemical cascade as actual herbivory, because the enzymes in insect saliva are part of what triggers the plant's alarm system. In other words, plants can tell the difference between an accident and an attack. There's also evidence that these warning signals aren't just one-way broadcasts, they're part of a broader conversation. Some plants seem to respond more strongly to distress signals from close relatives than from unrelated neighbours. Others may choose not to respond at all if the perceived threat is minimal. It's a system with nuance, not just a one-size-fits-all panic button. This kind of airborne signalling is called plant-to-plant communication, and it's been observed in many species, from corn and beans to maple trees and sagebrush. But communication doesn't stop at the air. Roots can send chemical messages through the soil, often using fungal networks as conduits. This below-ground signalling allows plants to coordinate responses across longer distances and maintain social ties with neighbours, sort of like a root-level social media platform. Some researchers believe that plants might even be capable of priming each other. In other words, A plant that has been exposed to stress, like drought or pest attack, may send out signals that prepare nearby plants for the same conditions, making them more resilient when the stress eventually arrives. It's like someone handing you an umbrella just before it starts to rain. Communication isn't always about danger, though. Plants also use chemical cues to attract allies. One of the best-known examples is in the realm of pollination. Flowers are essentially botanical billboards, advertising themselves to pollinators with bright colours, alluring shapes, and irresistible scents. The chemicals involved in floral scent are incredibly diverse. Hundreds of different volatile compounds that vary not just by species but by time of day, stage of bloom, and even weather conditions. Many flowers produce more scent in the evening, targeting nocturnal pollinators like moths. Others sync their fragrance to the busiest hours of bees or butterflies. Some even change their scent after pollination to let potential visitors know the buffet is closed. It's a remarkably efficient system, chemical advertising with real-time updates. But plants can go a step further. Some flowers don't just attract insects, they manipulate them. The orchid family, for instance, includes a number of species that use chemical mimicry to lure pollinators. One of the most famous examples is the bee orchid, which produces a flower that looks and smells like a female bee. Male bees, tricked by this botanical impersonation, attempt to mate with the flower, a behaviour charmingly known as pseudo-copulation. In the process, they pick up pollen and carry it to the next deceiving bloom. It's not very fair to the bee, but it gets the job done. Some plants even engage in cross-species recruitment by calling in bodyguards. When attacked by herbivores, certain species release VOCs that attract predatory insects, not just parasitic wasps but also ladybugs, lacewings, or predatory mites. These allies then feed on the attackers, providing the plant with a natural form of pest control. It's like outsourcing your security system to the local insect population. Of course, not all plant communication is quite so altruistic. Some plants use chemical warfare to sabotage their neighbours. This is known as allelopathy, and it involves releasing compounds into the air or soil that inhibit the growth of competing plants. Black walnut trees are infamous for this. Their roots secrete a compound called juglone, which is toxic to many other plant species. By chemically sterilizing the soil around them, walnut trees reduce competition and carve out a little extra breathing room. Even crop plants can get in on the action. Wheat and rice, for instance, produce chemicals that suppress the germination of nearby weed seeds. It's a sort of botanical turf war, and it plays out silently every day in fields, forests, and backyards across the globe. Some plants may also eavesdrop on their neighbours. A plant that detects VOCs from a wounded neighbour might start boosting its own defences, even if it hasn't been attacked yet. This kind of anticipatory behaviour can be extremely beneficial in dense plant communities, where the fate of one often predicts the fate of many. It's a little like noticing your neighbour putting up storm shutters and deciding to check the weather forecast. Chemical communication is so effective and widespread that researchers have started exploring ways to use it in agriculture. By mimicking the warning signals plants naturally produce, it may be possible to create treatments that help crops defend themselves without the need for synthetic pesticides. Imagine spraying a field not with chemicals to kill insects, but with a scent that tells the plants, "Get ready, something's coming." There are also efforts to breed or engineer crops that are better at attracting beneficial insects through scent. By enhancing these natural communication channels, we might be able to create healthier, more resilient agricultural systems that work with nature rather than against it. Even the timing of these chemical messages is important. Plants are incredibly sensitive to circadian rhythms, and their communication patterns often follow a daily schedule. Some defences are stronger in the morning, when herbivores are most active. Some floral scents peak in the late afternoon, aligning with pollinator visits. Others ramp up at night, calling in nocturnal allies or preparing for cooler temperatures. In this way, plants don't just talk, they listen. They respond to cues from the environment, from each other, and from the many insects, microbes, and animals that share their world. It's not communication in the human sense, there are no thoughts or feelings involved, but it is remarkably sophisticated, and perhaps most impressively, it's been going on for eons. Long before humans developed language, long before birds sang or wolves howled, plants were talking. They were sending signals, adjusting their chemistry, recruiting allies, and sometimes sabotaging their rivals. The forest was alive with messages. We just didn't know how to hear them. Now, with the help of modern science, we're starting to tune in. We're learning to decipher the language of leaves, to understand what plants are saying with their scents, their roots, their blooms, and their invisible emissions. It's a quiet conversation, but one that shapes ecosystems, supports biodiversity, and quite frankly, keeps the planet running. So the next time you pass a flowering bush or step into a garden, take a moment to appreciate the chemical conversations happening all around you. There may be no shouting or singing, but the plants are whispering of danger, of allies, of opportunities and threats. And in their own slow, fragrant chemical way, they are always speaking. Plants may be rooted in place, but that doesn't mean they're helpless. In fact, when it comes to self-defense, they've got a surprisingly sophisticated playbook. Imagine being constantly surrounded by hungry mouths, from insects and snails to goats and giraffes, and yet you can't run, can't swat, can't even scream. What's a leafy life form to do? As it turns out, quite a lot. Over millions of years, plants have evolved an impressive suite of defense strategies, some physical, some chemical, and a few downright sneaky. These tactics help them ward off predators, deter grazers, and even manipulate other species into doing their dirty work. The quiet, still life of a plant is more of a slow-motion battlefield than most of us ever realise. Let's start with the most visible line of defence: physical structures. Many plants come equipped with built-in armour. Think of thorns, spines and prickles, the botanical equivalent of barbed wire. Roses, for example, have prickles, which are sharp outgrowths from the epidermis. Cacti are famous for their spines, which are actually modified leaves. And hawthorns and blackberries come armed with long, rigid thorns, which are modified branches. These sharp features discourage animals from taking a bite or brushing too close. They're not foolproof. Some animals adapt and eat around them, but they certainly make grazing a bit less appealing. But there are softer, subtler defences too. Many plants have a layer of fine hairs on their leaves or stems, known as trichomes. These tiny projections can make the surface feel unpleasantly fuzzy, irritating, or even sticky to insects. In some species, like stinging nettles, trichomes act like hypodermic needles, injecting irritants when touched. One gentle brush against a nettle's leaves can leave you tingling, itching, or cursing softly under your breath. Still, plants don't stop at the surface. Many of their most powerful defences are invisible until you taste them, or try to. Plants produce an astonishing variety of chemical compounds specifically designed to deter herbivores. Some are bitter, some are toxic, and some mess with digestion in particularly unpleasant ways. Alkaloids are one such group. These are nitrogen-containing compounds that include some of the most familiar names in plant chemistry: caffeine, nicotine, morphine, and quinine. While humans have found all sorts of interesting uses for them, medicinal, recreational, and otherwise, plants use them primarily to make themselves unappetizing or outright dangerous to would-be grazers. Caffeine, for example, doesn't just wake up your brain, it's also toxic to many insects in high enough concentrations. Nicotine, similarly, is a powerful neurotoxin that deters insect herbivores from feasting on tobacco leaves. Then there are tannins, which you might know from tea or red wine. These compounds bind to proteins and make them harder to digest. In the plant world, that means a mouthful of leaves laced with tannins becomes a lot less nutritious and a lot more annoying for the animal chewing them. It's a gentle, persistent deterrent, the plant version of leaving sand in the sandwiches. Other defences are more direct. Cyanogenic glycosides, for example, release hydrogen cyanide when the plant tissue is damaged. This can be fatal to insects and even to larger animals if they eat enough. Some types of clover, cassava, and even apple seeds contain these compounds in small amounts. Proper preparation or cooking breaks them down in edible plants, but in the wild they act as a potent do-not-eat sign. And then we have glucosinolates, sulfur-containing compounds found in members of the mustard family like cabbage, broccoli, and horseradish. These create a pungent, spicy taste when the plant is chewed. To a rabbit, that hot zing might be a reason to reconsider dinner. To us, it's a condiment. Interestingly, many of the plant chemicals we now enjoy, whether as flavors, fragrances, or medicine, started off as defense mechanisms. Plants never intended to make our salads more exciting, or our spice racks more colorful. They were simply trying to avoid becoming lunch. But defense in the plant kingdom isn't always about making things unpleasant. Sometimes it's about recruiting reinforcements. Plants can and do enlist help in their battles against pests, and their allies are often members of the insect world. When under attack, certain plants release volatile organic compounds that attract predatory insects to the scene. Corn, cotton, and lima beans, for instance, emit specific scents when caterpillars begin chewing on their leaves. These scents serve as a kind of chemical distress signal, summoning parasitic wasps that lay their eggs inside the caterpillars. The wasp larvae then develop inside the unsuspecting herbivores, ultimately killing them. It's a gruesome but effective way for plants to fight back. Let nature's own hit squad take care of the problem. This isn't a rare phenomenon. More than 100 plant species across multiple families have been documented calling for backup in this way. The relationship is so finely tuned that some plants can vary the chemical blend they release depending on the type of attacker. Chewing insects, piercing insects, and even mechanical damage all produce different responses. It's not just a generic alarm, it's a customized plea for very specific help. Some plants go even further by forming more permanent alliances. Acacia trees, for example, have a famously close relationship with certain species of ants. The trees produce hollow thorns where the ants can live, as well as nectar-rich food bodies just for them. In return, the ants patrol the branches, attacking any herbivores or even other plants that come too close. It's a classic room and board for security arrangement, and it benefits both parties. The ants get a safe place to live and plenty to eat. The tree gets a built-in defense force, complete with jaws and stingers. In a few cases, these ant-plant relationships become so exclusive that the ants won't leave their host tree, even when offered other food sources. It's not just cooperation, it's co-evolution. Each species has shaped the other over time, resulting in a tightly woven partnership that goes far beyond casual mutualism. But not all defences are about chemical warfare or armed guards. Some plants rely on good old-fashioned trickery. A number of species use mimicry to avoid being eaten. One of the cleverest examples is the passionflower vine, which produces little yellowish spots on its leaves that look like butterfly eggs. Since butterflies tend to avoid laying eggs on leaves that already appear occupied, partly to avoid competition and partly to escape predators, this simple visual deception can reduce the number of caterpillars the plant has to deal with. It's a botanical version of nothing to see here. Other plants play dead in a sense. When touched, they wilt or droop, making themselves look less appealing. The sensitive plant Mimosa pudica is a well-known example, folding its leaves inward when disturbed. This sudden collapse may discourage grazers or shake off small insects, and after a short recovery period, the plant perks right back up. Some plants also engage in what might be called community defense. Certain species of trees have been observed to synchronize their seed production in a phenomenon known as masting. In mast years, the trees produce an overwhelming number of seeds all at once. This sudden abundance saturates the local environment with food, making it impossible for seed predators to eat them all. As a result, a higher percentage of seeds survive and germinate. In the years between mast events, the trees produce very few seeds, keeping predator populations low. It's a long-term, coordinated defense strategy on the scale of entire forests. And while many of these defenses are triggered by specific threats, some plants maintain a low-level readiness at all times. This is known as constitutive defense. It includes features like thorns, tough leaves, and baseline levels of toxic compounds. Other defenses are induced. They kick in only when the plant detects damage or stress. Induced defenses save energy, but constitutive defenses offer constant protection. Most plants use a mix of both, adjusting their strategy depending on their lifestyle and environment. There's a cost to all this, of course. Producing toxins, building armor, and signaling for help all require energy and resources that could otherwise go toward growth or reproduction. Plants have to make trade-offs. If conditions are good and predators are few, it might make sense to invest in leaves and flowers. But in rough neighborhoods full of nibblers, defense takes priority. Some plants even keep a sort of biochemical memory of past attacks, allowing them to respond more quickly if the same threat returns. It's not memory in the way humans understand it. There are no mental snapshots or emotional responses, but it is a physiological preparedness, a learned response encoded in the plant's molecular pathways. So while it may look like a plant is just sitting there, doing nothing, it's actually making strategic choices every moment. Should I toughen my leaves? Should I call for wasps? Should I invest in another flower or hold off until this beetle situation is under control? Plants may not have mouths to bite back, but that hasn't stopped them from becoming masters of survival. Their defenses are varied, adaptable, and often beautifully subtle. Whether through chemical deterrence, alliances with insects, armor, or trickery, they find ways to endure in a world full of hungry mouths. Next time you take a walk in the garden or through the woods, spare a thought for the quiet warriors around you. Every thorn, every bitter taste, every curled leaf or pungent scent tells a story, not of passivity but of resilience. Because in the plant world, staying still doesn't mean staying silent, it just means fighting smart. Pollination is one of those natural processes that sounds like background noise. Important, sure, but easy to overlook. Yet without pollination, life as we know it would stumble to a halt. That apple in your fruit bowl, the vanilla in your ice cream, the chocolate in your cupboard, and the coffee in your morning mug all exist because of this ancient exchange between plants and pollinators. But pollination isn't just biology, it's a pageant, a parade, a courtship, a delicate, dazzling dance between flower and visitor, with petals as stage curtains and nectar as the prize. At the heart of this drama is a simple need. Plants, for all their independence, still require a bit of outside help when it comes to reproduction. They need their pollen, the powdery packets of male genetic material, to reach the receptive stigma of another flower. For wind-pollinated plants like grasses and some trees, this is handled with brute force. They produce enormous clouds of pollen and let the wind scatter it like biological confetti. It's not particularly elegant and not terribly precise, but it works well enough for their purposes. It also explains why allergy season exists. But for flowering plants that rely on animals to do the job, the strategy becomes far more refined. These are the plants that have evolved to attract, feed and guide pollinators, from bees and butterflies to birds, bats, beetles, and even the occasional lizard. Each flower becomes a carefully designed invitation. Come closer. Take a sip. And if you wouldn't mind brushing up against this bit of pollen while you're at it. The variety of pollination strategies is staggering. Take bees, for example. These industrious little visitors are arguably the most important pollinators on the planet. Many flowers have evolved specifically to attract bees, offering up sweet nectar in exchange for a little pollen relocation. Bee-pollinated flowers are usually brightly coloured, especially in shades of blue and violet which bees see well, and often have a sweet fragrance. They tend to be open and accessible, allowing bees to land easily and navigate with their legs and proboscis. Some flowers go even further, adding visual cues like ultraviolet nectar guides, patterns on the petals that are invisible to humans but glow like landing lights for bees. These patterns help direct the insect right to the centre of the flower, where the reproductive parts are waiting. It's clever marketing, adapted for compound eyes. Butterflies, on the other hand, prefer a different layout. Because they have long, slender proboscises and tend to land gently, flowers that cater to butterflies are often tubular and brightly coloured in reds, oranges and pinks. They usually lack strong scents, since butterflies rely more on sight than smell, and they often provide broad landing platforms where the insects can perch and feed at leisure. Then there are moths, which tend to do their pollinating at night. Moth-pollinated flowers are typically pale or white, standing out in the moonlight, and they often emit strong, sweet fragrances to guide their visitors through the dark. Jasmine, yucca, and evening primrose are all pollinated by moths, and their blooms open just in time for twilight's first fluttering guests. Birds, particularly hummingbirds, also get in on the act. Flowers adapted for bird pollination are often vivid red or orange, with long, tubular shapes that match the birds' beaks. These flowers usually produce copious amounts of nectar but little or no scent. After all, birds have excellent vision but a poor sense of smell. Hummingbirds hover like feathered helicopters, sipping while inadvertently dusting their faces with pollen. It's pollination with a bit of aerial acrobatics. Bats, too, play a vital role, especially in tropical regions. Bat-pollinated flowers tend to be large, sturdy, and nocturnal. They often hang down to accommodate the bat's flight patterns and are filled with sweet, musky nectar. Some even smell faintly of fermented fruit, which bats find irresistible. While sipping or slurping from the flowers, bats get coated in pollen, which they carry with them to the next bloom. If you've ever eaten a banana, mango or guava, you might have a bat to thank. And then there are the beetles. Often overlooked and not exactly graceful, beetles are among the earliest pollinators in evolutionary history. Flowers that rely on beetles tend to be tough, open and bowl-shaped, offering a sturdy platform for clumsy visitors. They also often emit strong, spicy, or even unpleasant odours, because beetles like a bit of funk with their floral visits. Magnolias, one of the most ancient flowering plant lineages, are a prime example of beetle-pollinated flowers. While most of these pollination relationships are mutualistic, both the plant and the pollinator benefit, there are also some shady dealings in the floral world. Some plants cheat. A few orchids, for example, produce flowers that mimic the appearance and even the scent of female insects. Male insects, tricked into thinking they've found a mate, attempt to copulate with the flower. During the awkward encounter, they collect or deposit pollen. It's a floral con job, and it works remarkably well. Other flowers offer the promise of nectar but provide none. They trick pollinators into visiting just once, often enough to transfer pollen, before the visitor learns better and moves on. Still, the deception can be effective if enough naive pollinators pass through. In a few cases, the relationship becomes so tight, so specific, that plant and pollinator are completely dependent on each other. The classic example is the yucca plant and the yucca moth. The female moth deliberately gathers pollen from one flower, then flies to another, where she not only deposits the pollen but also lays her eggs in the ovary. The plant is pollinated, and the moth larvae eat a few of the developing seeds, but not all of them, just enough to feed the next generation without destroying the plant's ability to reproduce. It's a beautifully balanced arrangement, evolved through countless generations of delicate give and take. In fig trees, the relationship is even stranger. Each species of fig has its own specialized fig wasp that can navigate the complex interior of the fig's inverted flower. The wasp lays its eggs inside, pollinating the fig in the process. The larvae develop safely within, and when the time is right, new adult wasps emerge and fly off to find another fig. It's not exactly romantic, but it works. Pollination is also big business in human agriculture. Many crops depend heavily on managed pollinators, especially honeybees. In fact, entire industries have sprung up around transporting hives across regions to pollinate crops in bloom. Almond orchards in California, for instance, require billions of bees each year, brought in by the truckload just for the flowering period. It's a remarkable logistical operation, and it underscores just how vital pollination is to our food supply. But there are challenges too. Habitat loss, pesticide use, climate change, and disease have all taken a toll on pollinator populations worldwide. Bees, in particular, have faced steep declines in recent decades, raising concerns about food security and ecosystem health. Wild pollinators, like bumblebees, solitary bees, butterflies and moths, are just as important as honeybees and are often more efficient at pollinating certain plants. Protecting them means preserving the habitats they rely on: meadows, hedgerows, wildflower patches and forests. Fortunately, awareness is growing. Gardeners, farmers and city planners are increasingly working to create pollinator-friendly environments, planting native flowers, reducing pesticide use, and providing shelter for bees and butterflies can make a big difference. Even a small balcony garden can support a few pollinators, and those visits might be keeping someone's morning coffee or weekend peach cobbler on the menu. Pollination is not just a biological transaction, it's a celebration of connection. It's a reminder that even the most stationary organisms are deeply intertwined with the world around them. A flower opens, a bee visits, a seed is made. It's simple and sublime, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Next time you see a bee hovering over a daisy, or a hummingbird darting between blooms, take a moment to appreciate the choreography. What looks like a simple sip of nectar is, in fact, a vital act of ecological partnership. An ancient alliance that keeps our ecosystems humming, our gardens blooming, and our plates full. And perhaps most wonderfully, pollination is a story of generosity. The plant offers a gift: nectar, scent, shelter. The visitor takes that gift and gives one in return: movement, pollen, a bridge between flowers. It's an exchange rooted not in competition, but in cooperation. And in a world that can sometimes feel loud and rushed, that quiet act of mutual benefit is worth noticing and celebrating. Nightfall may seem like a time when the plant world winds down and tucks itself in for a well-earned rest, but in reality, darkness reveals a whole different side of botanical life. While animals might curl up in dens or head home to roost, plants don't retreat, they transform. The night brings shifts in temperature, humidity, light, and atmospheric conditions, and plants respond with an impressive series of adjustments, behaviours, and in some cases brand new performances. What plants do in the dark is a fascinating blend of biochemistry, timing, and quiet adaptation. The idea that plants sleep is an appealing one. After all, we humans love the concept of everything curling up with a blanket and dozing off, and while plants don't sleep in the way animals do, there are no dreams of sunbeams or sugar plums involved. They do undergo significant changes at night, many of which are regulated by internal biological clocks known as circadian rhythms. These rhythms are driven by genes and proteins that cycle over approximately 24 hours, even in the absence of external cues. In the case of plants, circadian rhythms help time all sorts of critical processes, like when to open and close stomata, when to produce certain chemicals, and when to grow. One of the most visible nighttime behaviours in plants is called nitinasti. This is the movement of leaves or petals in response to the onset of darkness. Many plants fold their leaves upward or inward at night, a behaviour that has puzzled scientists and poets alike for centuries. You might see clover leaves collapse together like a hand in prayer, or legume leaves droop gently as the light fades. Some flowers, like tulips and morning glories, close their petals entirely, only to open them again with the morning sun. But why do plants bother with this nightly choreography? One theory is that it helps reduce water loss. During the day, stomata, tiny pores on the surface of leaves, open to allow gas exchange. Carbon dioxide comes in, oxygen and water vapour go out. At night, when photosynthesis halts due to the lack of sunlight, these pores close to conserve water. Folding the leaves might help reduce surface exposure and slow down evaporation even further, particularly in dry or windy environments. Another possible reason is defence. By closing their petals or drooping their leaves, plants may protect their more delicate parts from nighttime herbivores or sudden temperature drops. In the tropics, where nighttime predators like beetles and moths are more active, some flowers close up entirely at dusk, discouraging unwanted visitors. Others might rely on nighttime pollinators and open only after dark, trading protection for opportunity. This leads us to the Nocturnal Pollination Club, a lesser known but no less important group of plants that do their business under the stars. While bees and butterflies rule the daytime, many plants cater to creatures of the night. These include moths, bats, and even a few species of nocturnal beetles. Their flowers are often pale or white to stand out in low light, and they emit strong, sweet scents that can travel farther in the cooler, stiller air of evening. One of the most famous of these night bloomers is the moonflower, a vine that opens its large, luminous white blossoms just after sunset. The scent is rich and intoxicating, designed to attract moths from a distance. Similarly, the night-blooming jasmine releases its perfume only after dusk, luring in nighttime pollinators with a scent that seems to grow stronger the darker it gets. Some cacti also bloom at night, particularly in arid desert environments where daytime heat is intense. The queen of the night cactus, Selenocerius grandiflorus, is a showstopper. Its enormous white flowers bloom only once a year, and only for a single night, wilting by morning. It's a fleeting spectacle that requires precise timing and a little luck to witness. The timing of these nighttime behaviours is closely regulated by the plant's internal clock. Even if kept in constant darkness, many plants will continue to open and close their flowers or fold their leaves according to a 24-hour cycle. This indicates that the rhythm is endogenous. It comes from within. But external cues like light and temperature can also fine-tune these rhythms, helping plants stay synchronized with the world around them. In addition to movement and pollination, many metabolic processes shift gears at night. During the day, photosynthesis dominates the energy game. Sunlight powers the production of glucose, and oxygen is released as a byproduct. But at night, the photosynthetic machinery shuts down, and plants rely on stored energy to maintain basic functions. This energy comes from the sugars created during the day. These sugars are either used immediately or stored as starch in structures like leaves and stems. As night falls, enzymes begin breaking down these starch reserves into usable sugars, which are then distributed throughout the plant. It's a bit like living off leftovers, efficient, planned, and critical for keeping the lights on when the sun is off duty. In fact, plants are surprisingly good at budgeting their energy. Studies have shown that some plants can calculate how much starch they have and adjust the rate at which it's consumed so that it lasts exactly until sunrise. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to make it through the night without running out. It's a botanical version of rationing guided by internal timekeeping and careful accounting. This nightly routine of shifting from photosynthesis to respiration is vital for growth. Much of a plant's growth actually occurs at night, when energy and resources are directed toward elongating stems, expanding leaves, and building new tissues. During the day, energy is collected. At night, it's spent. You can almost picture the plant as a quiet builder, hammering away after dark, growing imperceptibly taller while the rest of the world sleeps. Temperature plays a big role in this nighttime dance as well. In many climates, nights are cooler and more humid than days. Plants respond to these changes by adjusting their cellular functions. For instance, the opening and closing of stomata is influenced not just by light, but also by temperature and humidity. In some species, stomata actually open slightly at night to allow limited gas exchange, particularly in environments where water is abundant. But in arid regions, many plants follow a special strategy known as CAM photosynthesis, short for crassulation acid metabolism. This adaptation allows them to open their stomata at night instead of during the day, reducing water loss while still taking in carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is stored as an acid overnight and used for photosynthesis the following day. It's a clever workaround for tough conditions, and it's used by many succulents and cacti. Even the microbial life associated with plants changes at night. Soil microbes that help with nutrient exchange, root growth, or disease resistance may become more active in cooler, moister nighttime conditions. The rhizosphere, the zone around the roots, can become a lively microbial marketplace after sunset, with roots exuding sugars and microbes trading nutrients in return. It's like a quiet underground bazaar, lit not by lanterns but by chemical signals. Meanwhile, back above ground, the reduction in light has another curious effect. It alters the colours of some plants, or at least how they appear. In moonlight or low light, green appears darker, while white and silver foliage can seem to glow. Some plants, like dusty miller or lamb's ear, have silvery leaves with fine hairs that catch and reflect the moonlight, making them especially striking in nighttime gardens. These adaptations may help protect against temperature fluctuations or simply provide a bit of extra appeal to nocturnal pollinators. Even sound may play a role in the nighttime world of plants. While the idea of plants responding to sound is still being explored, some studies suggest that plants can detect vibrations and respond accordingly. This sensitivity could help them tune in to environmental cues, including the movements of nearby insects or changes in wind. It's not hearing in the way we understand it, but it's one more way plants are tuned into their surroundings day and night. For many of us, the night is a time of rest and recovery. For plants, it's a time of rebalancing, recharging, and quiet industry. They shift their strategies, adjust their physiology, and in many cases show us that being rooted doesn't mean being rigid. The nighttime behaviours of plants reveal a side we don't often think about. A world of moonlight blossoms, sleepy leaves, and carefully rationed starch. So if you find yourself outside after dark, take a moment to look a little closer. That vine might be reaching, that blossom might just be opening, and that quiet patch of greenery is far more awake than it seems. While we sleep, the plants are still there, growing, breathing, listening, and living out their own version of the night shift. Trees are the elder statesmen of the plant kingdom. Towering, ancient, and often slow to change, they exude an air of quiet wisdom. If shrubs are the gossiping neighbours and grasses the busy commuters, trees are the old souls sitting calmly at the edge of the village watching the world turn. But despite their stillness, trees are far from solitary or passive. In fact, many trees are deeply social creatures, connected, responsive, and surprisingly attuned to their neighbours. Some researchers even argue that trees have a kind of memory, not in the conscious storytelling sense, but in the form of long-lasting physiological responses to past experiences. It's a slow-motion form of remembering, written in rings and branches and chemical cues. Let's begin with the roots, which is where much of a tree's social life happens. In a healthy forest, the roots of neighbouring trees often overlap and even fuse in places. Through these connections, trees can share water, nutrients, and chemical signals. But the true magic happens through their fungal partners. These fungi, specifically mycorrhizal fungi, form symbiotic relationships with the roots of trees and many other plants. They extend delicate thread-like structures called hyphae into the soil, dramatically increasing the plant's access to water and minerals. In return, the tree supplies the fungi with sugars produced through photosynthesis. It's a win-win partnership, but it doesn't stop there. These fungal networks don't just connect a tree to its fungal friend. They often connect many trees to each other, forming what scientists call a common mycorrhizal network. This is sometimes nicknamed the Wood Wide Web, and the comparison to the internet isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Through this underground network, trees can share resources and information across considerable distances. For example, if one tree is struggling, say due to drought or insect attack, neighbouring trees might shift their sugar exports through the fungal network to help support it. This happens especially often between parent trees and their offspring. A large established tree may funnel resources to smaller saplings nearby, particularly if they're genetically related. This kind of support helps young trees survive in the dense shade of the forest floor until they can reach enough light to begin thriving on their own. Some trees even seem to recognise their kin. In laboratory experiments, researchers have found that seedlings growing near siblings allocate resources differently than those growing near unrelated individuals. Kin plants are less competitive and more cooperative. It's a gentle form of favoritism, a quiet, root-level nepotism that helps ensure the success of the family tree, literally. But this underground generosity isn't limited to relatives. In some cases, trees of different species appear to exchange nutrients, especially when environmental conditions vary across the forest. A fast-growing species that captures lots of light might share sugars with a shade-tolerant neighbour that has better access to water or nutrients. The forest becomes a collaborative economy, where trees act less like isolated competitors and more like members of a diverse and dynamic community. Still, not everything about tree communication is cooperative. There are also chemical skirmishes and boundary disputes. Some trees release allelopathic compounds into the soil, chemicals that inhibit the growth of competitors nearby. This strategy helps reduce competition for water, nutrients, and light. Black walnut trees, for example, produce a compound called juglone, which is toxic to many other plant species. It's a botanical version of building a fence and hanging a keep out sign. But when it comes to long-term survival, collaboration often wins out. Forests thrive not because of ruthless competition, but because of balance. A diverse forest, with many different tree species and age groups, is more resilient to pests, diseases, and environmental stress. The network of connections, both fungal and chemical, acts like an immune system for the whole ecosystem, passing along signals and shoring up weak points. These connections may even carry information that resembles memory. Trees can remember past droughts, in the sense that they alter their behavior based on past stress. For instance, a tree that has experienced a dry period may respond more quickly and strongly to drought in the future. This isn't memory in the neural sense, but it's a kind of physiological preparedness. The tree's internal chemistry, its gene expression, and even its growth patterns change in ways that reflect its past. Tree rings are another form of memory, one that humans have been reading for centuries. Each ring represents a year of growth, and by studying the width and composition of these rings, scientists can learn about historical climate patterns, forest fires, disease outbreaks, and more. In drought years, the rings are narrow. In wet years, they're wider. Some rings bear scars from lightning strikes or insect infestations. A tree, in this sense, is a living archive of its own life and the conditions it has endured. Trees can also store information in the chemical makeup of their tissues. Leaves, bark, and sap can all carry signatures of past events. For example, certain stress hormones may linger in a tree's system for weeks or months after an attack. This helps the tree respond more quickly if the threat returns. It may also send signals to nearby trees warning them to prepare. In this way, trees not only remember, they teach. This capacity for memory and communication becomes especially important when considering long-lived trees. Some species can live for hundreds, even thousands of years. A bristlecone pine in California is over 4,000 years old. A clonal colony of quaking aspen in Utah, known as pando, may be tens of thousands of years old if you count the shared root system. These trees have weathered changes in climate, survived fires and floods, and watched entire civilizations rise and fall. Their longevity depends in part on their ability to adapt and share resources across generations. In many indigenous cultures, trees are seen as teachers or elders, repositories of wisdom and knowledge. This perspective, once dismissed as poetic metaphor, now seems more scientifically grounded than ever. Trees are aware of their environment. They respond to changes, they communicate, they remember. They are not people, and their intelligence is not human, but they are far more complex and responsive than we used to believe. Even their canopies show signs of awareness. In some forests, trees of the same species will grow their branches in ways that avoid overlapping with their neighbours. This phenomenon, known as crown shyness, results in a striking pattern of narrow gaps between tree crowns when viewed from below. The exact cause is still debated, Some think it's a way to reduce the spread of pests. Others believe it minimises physical damage from wind. But the result is a clear sign that trees respond to each other's presence, even high above the ground. Trees also play a role in guiding the development of ecosystems. As they grow and die, they shape the soil, the light conditions, the moisture levels, and the entire microclimate around them. Their fallen leaves become mulch. Their roots hold soil in place. Their branches offer shelter to birds, insects, and countless other species. When a large tree falls, it creates an opening in the canopy, allowing light to reach the forest floor and giving new plants a chance to grow. Even in death, a tree nourishes the life around it. In urban environments, trees take on additional roles. They reduce the heat island effect by providing shade and cooling the air through transpiration. They absorb carbon dioxide and pollutants. They reduce noise and buffer wind. And perhaps most importantly, they offer psychological benefits. Studies have shown that spending time near trees, whether in a park or simply walking down a tree-lined street, can reduce stress, lower blood pressure, and improve mood. Trees don't just make the environment healthier, they make us healthier too. So the next time you find yourself near a tree, consider this. You're in the presence of a being that may be older than your grandparents, connected to its neighbours through a living network beneath the soil and shaped by years, sometimes centuries of experience. That tree may be quietly sharing sugars with a struggling sapling. It may be preparing for drought. It may be warning others of a threat. It may, in its own quiet way, remember a fire from 50 years ago. Trees don't speak with words, but they have a language all their own. Written in chemicals, gestures, and time. It's a language we're only just beginning to understand, but one that has been spoken in forests and groves for millennia. They are not simply background scenery. They are participants, witnesses, and architects of life on Earth. And in a world that often feels loud and fast, trees offer something else: patience. They teach us to slow down, to listen carefully, and to remember that growth is not always visible, that strength can be quiet, and that the roots we cannot see may be the most important connections of all. If you've ever seen a Venus flytrap in action, you'll know it's hard not to be impressed. There's something both delightful and slightly alarming about a plant snapping shut around an insect, as though nature decided to take a walk on the weird side. But the Venus flytrap is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to plants that eat meat. Across the globe, in bogs, swamps, and nutrient-poor soils, a curious band of botanical outliers have evolved to feast on animals. Not because they're bloodthirsty, of course, but because they had to get creative about dinner. Carnivorous plants, also called insectivorous plants, have evolved in environments where the soil is low in essential nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus. These plants still perform photosynthesis like their leafy cousins, but it's not enough to meet all their nutritional needs, so they've developed extraordinary adaptations to supplement their diet. In essence, they've added a bit of animal protein to the menu, and the methods they use to catch their prey range from passive traps to full-blown mechanical drama. Let's start with the showstopper, the Venus flytrap. Native to a small area of the Carolinas in the United States, the Venus flytrap looks like something dreamed up by a science fiction writer. Each of its modified leaves is split into two lobes that open wide, like a hinged jaw, with tiny hair-like triggers on the inner surface. When an unsuspecting insect touches these hairs twice within about 20 seconds, the trap snaps shut. It's one of the fastest movements in the plant kingdom, and it's entirely mechanical. No muscles, no nerves, just hydraulic pressure and clever geometry. Once closed, the trap seals tightly and begins to digest the unlucky insect. The plant releases enzymes that break down soft tissues, absorbing nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. After about a week, the trap reopens, revealing the dry, indigestible parts of the insect: legs, wings, and exoskeletons, blown away by the breeze or washed away by rain. It's neat, efficient, and strangely elegant. The Venus flytrap is a classic example of an active trap, meaning it involves movement. But not all carnivorous plants go to such theatrical lengths. Some prefer a subtler approach. Enter the pitcher plants. Pitcher plants come in many varieties and are found across several plant families, including Nepenthes and Sarraceniaceae. These plants form deep, vase-shaped structures, pitchers, filled with digestive liquid. The inner walls are often slippery, and many produce nectar or scent to lure in insects. Once inside, the hapless visitor finds it difficult to escape. Some pitcher plants have downward-pointing hairs that make climbing back out nearly impossible. Others rely on waxy surfaces that become dangerously slick when wet. The trapped insect eventually drowns in the liquid at the bottom, where enzymes or symbiotic bacteria break down its body. The plant then absorbs the released nutrients through special cells lining the pitcher. It's the botanical equivalent of a pit trap, and it works remarkably well. Some of the larger species, like Nepenthes raja, are known to trap not just insects but also small frogs, lizards, and even rodents. These are rare events, but they do happen, and they lend a certain gothic flair to the already dramatic world of carnivorous plants. Sundews take yet another approach. These charming little plants, found on every continent except Antarctica, look like something from a glitter-covered fantasy film. Their leaves are covered in fine, glandular hairs tipped with droplets of sticky mucilage. To the human eye, it looks like morning dew, hence the name. But to an insect, it's a trap. When a bug lands on the leaf, it quickly finds itself stuck. The more it struggles, the more entangled it becomes. In some species, the leaf actually curls around the prey to increase contact and digestive efficiency. Enzymes are secreted to dissolve the insect's body, and the nutrients are absorbed through the leaf surface. It's a slow, glistening embrace, and one the insect won't survive. Bladderworts, on the other hand, have developed what might be the most sophisticated trapping mechanism of all. These aquatic or semi-aquatic plants produce tiny bladder-like structures on their stems. Each bladder has a trapdoor sealed shut by pressure. When a small aquatic organism, like a mosquito larva or water flea, touches the sensitive hairs near the trap entrance, the bladder snaps open in less than a millisecond, sucking in water and prey alike. It's the fastest known movement in the plant kingdom, and it all happens underwater, hidden from view. After the meal, the bladder slowly resets, ready for the next round. Then there's the corkscrew plant, which takes the passive trap to a new level. Found mostly in tropical areas, it has underground leaves that form spiraling tubes. Tiny soil organisms wander in through openings, lured by secretions, and find themselves trapped in a twisting tunnel that leads only one way, downward. Eventually they reach a chamber where digestion takes place. These plants are difficult to observe directly because their traps are underground, but their mechanism is no less clever than their above-ground cousins. What all these plants have in common is a remarkable ability to convert animal protein into plant food. They don't just digest for fun, they do it to survive. In environments where most other plants struggle to find enough nitrogen or phosphorus, carnivorous plants have carved out a niche by adding protein to their otherwise green diet. And evolution has made sure they do it well. The enzymes used in digestion, proteases, phosphatases and others, are highly efficient and specialized. Some plants even adjust their enzyme production based on what they've caught. For example, if a plant traps an insect rich in protein, it may produce more proteases to break it down. If the prey is rich in chitin, it may upregulate chitinase production instead. It's a level of biochemical flexibility that's rare in the plant kingdom. Some carnivorous plants also use microbial partners to aid in digestion. Certain pitcher plants harbour colonies of bacteria, fungi, or even small animals like mosquito larvae that help break down captured prey. In return, these guests get a stable, nutrient-rich environment to live in. It's a complex, multi-species arrangement, less predator and prey, more miniature ecosystem. The evolutionary origins of carnivore plants are fascinating. Scientists believe that carnivorous traits have evolved independently multiple times across different lineages, which suggests that eating animals is a pretty good idea if you're a plant stuck in nutrient-poor soil. The triggers for this evolutionary leap often involve environmental pressures, wetlands, bogs, or sandy habitats where essential nutrients are leached away or locked up in forms that plants can't easily use. Interestingly, carnivorous plants don't always rely on meat. If nutrients are plentiful, they can photosynthesize and grow just like any other plant. Some species become less carnivorous when conditions improve. In lab settings, they can survive without prey if given the right nutrients in the soil. This flexibility highlights how carnivory is a strategy, not an absolute requirement. It's a backup plan. A plan B that involves tiny jaws, slippery traps, and chemical digestion, but a plan nonetheless. For all their exotic charm, many carnivorous plants are surprisingly delicate. Many species are endangered or threatened due to habitat destruction, pollution, and illegal collection. Wetlands in particular are vulnerable ecosystems, and draining them for agriculture or development puts these unique plants at risk. Conservation efforts around the world aim to protect the habitats of carnivorous plants and educate the public about their ecological importance. And they are important, not just for their quirky diets, but for the roles they play in their ecosystems. Carnivorous plants help control insect populations, serve as homes for specialized animals, and contribute to nutrient cycling in their habitats. Their presence is a sign of a unique and often fragile environment. They're also a source of endless fascination. Whether it's the spring-loaded snap of a Venus flytrap, the glistening tentacles of a sundew, or the deep mysterious pitches of a tropical nepenthes, these plants challenge our ideas of what a plant is supposed to be. They're not just passive photosynthesizers, they're active hunters, quiet carnivores, green predators lurking in plain sight. So the next time you see one of these plants, whether in a botanical garden, a nature documentary, or sitting quietly on someone's windowsill, remember that you're looking at something rare and extraordinary. A plant that bends the rules, a leaf with a secret, a living paradox that blurs the line between flora and fauna. And somewhere out there, an insect is making its way toward a sweet-smelling pitcher, completely unaware that this particular flower isn't offering hospitality. It's offering lunch, just not in the way the visitor expected. From the icy peaks of mountain ranges to the sizzling sands of deserts, from brackish mangrove swamps to acidic bogs, plants have found a way to survive in nearly every corner of the planet. And not just survive, thrive, adapt, and even look fabulous while doing so. These are the botanist daredevils, the evolutionary acrobats of the plant world. They're extreme in the truest sense, not because they seek adventure, but because life has pushed them into the margins, and in response, they've come up with some of the most unusual, ingenious, and occasionally downright bizarre adaptations in all of biology. Let's begin in one of the most punishing environments imaginable, the desert. The word alone conjures images of blistering sun, scorching sand, and, ironically, a desperate lack of water. And yet, deserts are home to an astonishing array of plant life. Chief among them are the succulents, a group of plants that have evolved to hoard water like it's gold. Cacti are perhaps the most iconic desert plants, and for good reason. Their thick, fleshy stems serve as reservoirs, storing water during the rare occasions when rain does fall. Their leaves have been reduced to spines, which not only discourage thirsty herbivores, but also reduce water loss by minimizing surface area. The outer skin is often coated in a waxy substance that helps prevent evaporation, and many species open their stomata only at night to avoid losing moisture in the daytime heat. A strategy known as CAM photosynthesis, short for crassulacean acid metabolism. But cacti aren't the only ones with desert survival smarts. Aloe, agave, and euphorbia species have evolved similar strategies, despite belonging to different plant families. This is a beautiful example of convergent evolution, where unrelated species independently evolve similar traits to cope with similar challenges. In other words, nature figured out the same answer to the same question several times over. And let's not forget the resurrection plants. These botanical marvels, like Selaginella lepidophylla, can survive being almost completely dried out. During droughts, they curl into tight, brittle balls and appear dead. But give them a splash of water, and within hours they uncurl, turn green, and resume photosynthesis. It's not a resurrection in the spiritual sense, but it's about as close as a plant can get. Moving from hot and dry to cold and dry, let's travel to the alpine tundra and polar regions, where low temperatures and short growing seasons challenge even the hardiest of flora. Here, plants have to be compact, efficient, and incredibly resilient. Many alpine plants grow low to the ground in cushion-like shapes, which help reduce heat loss and protect them from wind. Their small, thick leaves conserve moisture and are often covered in fine hairs that trap heat and reduce frost damage. Take the moss campion, for example. It's a tight, mound-shaped plant found in Arctic and alpine regions. Its structure creates a warmer microclimate within the cushion, allowing it to photosynthesize even in frigid temperatures. Or consider the Arctic poppy, which tracks the sun like a solar dish and has translucent petals that act like little greenhouses, warming the reproductive organs inside. And then there's the ancient bristlecone pine. Some individuals have been alive for over 4,000 years, making them some of the oldest living organisms on Earth. These trees grow slowly in high, dry mountain ranges where few others can compete. Their secret lies in their dense, resin-rich wood, which resists insects, fungi, and decay. Even dead sections of the tree can remain standing for thousands of years, weathered but unbowed. Now let's head to the other extreme. Waterlogged and nutrient-poor environments like bogs and swamps. Here, oxygen is scarce in the soil, and nutrients are often locked up in decaying organic matter. To cope, many plants have evolved specialized structures that allow them to breathe and absorb nutrients in unconventional ways. Mangroves are a textbook example of this kind of adaptation. Found in tropical coastal areas, these trees thrive in salty, swampy conditions that would kill most other plants. Mangroves have developed aerial roots called pneumatophores that stick up out of the mud like snorkels, allowing the plant to access oxygen even when the soil is waterlogged. Their roots also excrete excess salt and stabilize the shoreline against erosion. Bogs present a different challenge. With their acidic, nutrient-poor soils, they are inhospitable to many plants. But some, like the carnivorous sundews and pitcher plants, have turned to alternative sources of nutrition, namely insects. These plants have already made an appearance in our journey, but they're worth mentioning again here because their carnivory evolved precisely because of the harsh, nutrient-poor conditions in bogs. When the soil offers little, they look to the sky and the bugs buzzing above it for sustenance. Now imagine trying to grow in soil that's not just wet but salty. Salty enough to make even your tears wince. This is the reality for halophytes, or salt-loving plants that grow in salt flats, coastal marshes, and saline deserts. These plants have developed incredible mechanisms for dealing with high salinity, which would normally dehydrate plant cells by drawing water out through osmosis. Some halophytes excrete salt through specialized glands on their leaves, creating a sparkling crust that can be washed away by rain. Others store the salt in older leaves that eventually drop off, taking the excess with them. One famous example is Salicornia, also known as glasswort or sea asparagus, which thrives in salt marshes and is even edible. It tastes, unsurprisingly, a bit salty. And while we're talking about unusual growing conditions, let's not ignore the high-flying plants, epiphytes. These are plants that grow not in soil, but on other plants, usually high up in the canopy. They're not parasites, they don't steal nutrients from their hosts, but they do take advantage of better light and airflow by living above the ground. Orchids, bromeliads, and some types of ferns are classic examples. They collect water and nutrients from rain, dust, and decaying matter that accumulates in crevices or specialized leaf structures. Some bromeliads, like the tank bromeliads, form a central reservoir that holds rainwater and provides habitat for insects, frogs, and even small snakes. It's like a tiny rainforest within a single plant. Speaking of living off the air, let's talk about air plants. specifically members of the genus Tillandsia. These plants absorb water and nutrients directly through their leaves and don't need soil at all. They're masters of minimalism, thriving in environments where most other plants would dry up and blow away. Another fascinating group of plants has adapted to life on rocks, literally. Lithophytes grow in rocky crevices where soil is minimal, relying on rainwater, moss and lichen to provide a foothold and some nutrients. Their roots may be short, but they're strong, anchoring the plant against wind and erosion. You might see these tenacious little botanists clinging to cliff sides, basking in the sun like fearless mountaineers. Then there are the plants that live in fire-prone areas. In Mediterranean climates, Australian bushlands, and certain American forests, wildfires are a regular occurrence. Instead of fearing fire, some plants have embraced it. Many pine species have serotinous cones that only release seeds in response to the heat of a fire. The flames clear away competitors and enrich the soil with ash, giving the next generation a clean slate and a nutrient boost. Other species like the fire poppy or certain types of eucalyptus sprout quickly after fire, taking advantage of the sudden burst of light and space. These plants are part of a fire-dependent ecosystem where destruction is not an end but a necessary part of renewal. In environments where flooding is common, like monsoon plains or seasonal wetlands, some plants have evolved to float. Water hyacinths, lotus, and duckweed all have buoyant tissues that allow them to live on the surface of water, absorbing nutrients from whatever floats by. Their roots dangle freely in the water column, while their leaves and flowers bask in the sun above. The lotus, in particular, is a marvel. Its leaves are coated in a waxy layer that repels water, causing droplets to bead up and roll off, taking dirt and microbes with them. This self-cleaning effect, known as the lotus effect, has even inspired waterproof materials in human engineering. Sometimes the solutions nature invents are so efficient, we end up borrowing them. Of course, extreme environments often mean extreme relationships. Some plants have entered into close partnerships with fungi, bacteria, or animals to help them cope with their surroundings. Mycorrhizal fungi help plants access hard-to-reach nutrients. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in the roots of legumes, converting atmospheric nitrogen into a usable form, and mutualistic relationships with ants, birds, or bats can provide protection or pollination services in exchange for shelter or food. These alliances highlight an important theme in the world of extreme plants: flexibility. Whether it's storing water, excreting salt, dodging fire, or recruiting allies, plants have shown an astonishing capacity to adapt. They bend but don't break. They improvise. They innovate. And sometimes they just hunker down and wait out the storm. So next time you're walking across a patch of rocky ground, passing a swampy ditch, or gazing at the wind-blasted slope of a mountain, take a closer look. The plants you see might not be flashy, but they are survivors. They've turned adversity into opportunity, harshness into home, and they do it all without complaint, without fuss, and often without anyone even noticing. In their quiet way, they remind us that life doesn't always flourish in comfort. Sometimes it takes root in the cracks, blooms in the margins, and thrives in places no one thought possible. These are the pioneers of the plant world, tough, resourceful, and endlessly creative, and in their resilience they carry a lesson worth learning. That being rooted doesn't mean being stuck, and that sometimes the harshest places give rise to the most extraordinary lives. Every great drama has its finale, and in the world of plants that finale is reproduction. Whether it's a showy explosion of petals and scent or a quiet, wind-blown whisper of pollen, plants take the business of making more plants very seriously. It's not just about spreading seeds, it's about strategy, timing, survival, and a touch of flair. Because let's face it, even for a creature rooted to the spot, reproduction is a high-stakes adventure. At the heart of it all is the flower, part beauty pageant, part biochemical factory, and part matchmaking agency. The flower is where plants combine function and finesse to achieve their ultimate goal, genetic continuity. For most flowering plants, Reproduction is a sexual affair involving male and female structures, often conveniently located on the same bloom. The male parts of a flower are known as the stamens. Each stamen consists of a filament topped with an anther, which produces pollen. Pollen grains carry the plant's male gametes, essentially its version of sperm. The female part of the flower is called the pistil or carpel. At its tip is the stigma, a sticky landing pad designed to catch pollen. Below that is the style, a slender stalk that leads to the ovary, where ovules, the plant's eggs, are waiting. When pollen lands on the right stigma, a pollen tube grows down the style to deliver the sperm cells to the ovule. If all goes well, fertilization occurs, and a seed begins to form. Around that seed, in many species, a fruit develops, providing protection, nourishment, and, perhaps most importantly, a vehicle for dispersal. Now, some plants are perfectly happy to pollinate themselves. This is called self-pollination, and it has the benefit of being reliable. You don't have to wait for bees or breezes or anything else. You just go ahead and fertilize your own ovules. It's quick, efficient, and in some cases life-saving in isolated environments where pollinators are scarce. But most flowering plants prefer cross-pollination, getting pollen from another individual. This leads to greater genetic diversity, which means healthier offspring, more adaptability, and a better shot at weathering whatever life throws their way. Cross-pollination does require a go-between, and that's where pollinators come in. We've already explored how flowers attract bees, birds, and bats with colour, scent, and nectar. But beyond luring in helpers, plants have also evolved intricate mechanisms to ensure their pollen gets where it needs to go. Some flowers have explosive stamens that catapult pollen onto visiting insects. Others use traps, timing, or temperature-sensitive petals to control access to their reproductive parts. In the case of the bucket orchid, things get downright theatrical. This flower has a slippery, waxy lip that causes visiting bees to fall into a fluid-filled bucket. The only way out is through a narrow tunnel, and as the bee wriggles through, it gets coated with pollen. It's a bit undignified, but extremely effective. Once fertilization occurs, the next phase begins. Seed development. Seeds are botanical time capsules, dormant embryos packed with everything they need to start life anew. They contain a protective outer coat, a food reserve, and a tiny plant embryo with a root, shoot, and leaf or two just waiting to emerge. But of course, seeds are only useful if they end up somewhere they can grow. That brings us to the equally fascinating topic of seed dispersal. Plants have evolved an astonishing range of strategies to send their offspring out into the world, often with far more drama than one might expect from a humble seed. Some rely on wind. These seeds are lightweight, often equipped with wings, hairs, or parachutes. Think of dandelions, their seeds carried aloft on fluffy tufts like miniature hot air balloons, or maple keys which spin to the ground in lazy circles. These designs increase the chances of finding new, suitable ground far from the shadow of the parent plant. Other seeds are launched with force. The touch-me-not plant, for example, has seed pods that burst open at the slightest touch, flinging seeds in all directions. The sandbox tree, sometimes called the dynamite tree, takes this idea to the extreme. Its large fruit pods explode with a loud bang, sending seeds flying at speeds of up to 150 miles per hour. It's plant reproduction, with a side of pyrotechnics. Some plants use water. Coconut palms drop their seeds, yes, coconuts, into the sea, where they float for weeks or even months before washing up on a distant shore. Water lilies release seeds that drift gently away with the current. For plants living near rivers, lakes, or oceans, water is a perfectly sensible courier service. But the most charming and diverse method of seed dispersal involves animals. This can happen in a variety of ways. Some seeds are encased in delicious fruits. When an animal eats the fruit, the seed passes through its digestive system and is deposited, often far from the original plant, in a lovely pile of fertilizer. Bananas, cherries, figs, and countless other fruits rely on this method. and many seeds are specially adapted to survive a trip through the guts of a bird or mammal. Other seeds hitch rides. Burrs, those tiny hook-covered troublemakers, stick to fur, feathers and socks. Their design was even the inspiration for Velcro. The idea is simple. Attach yourself to a moving creature and drop off when conditions seem right. It's slow but steady and often remarkably successful. Some seeds are stored by animals, squirrels for example, that bury nuts for later. If they forget a cache or don't retrieve it in time, the seed has a chance to germinate. This method is particularly important for large seeds that are too heavy to travel by wind or water. But dispersal isn't just about getting away from the parent plant, it's also about finding the right conditions. Light, moisture, temperature and soil all have to align. Many seeds remain dormant for months or even years, waiting for the perfect moment. Some need a cold period to mimic winter. Others need fire to crack open their hard coats. Some require water, sunlight, or even passage through an animal's digestive system to trigger germination. It's a delicate, patient process. Once the seed germinates, the cycle begins again. The tiny root or radical pushes downward, anchoring the plant and seeking water. The shoot emerges, reaching upward toward light. Leaves unfurl, chloroplasts activate, and before long, the plant is photosynthesizing, growing, and preparing to flower in its own time. Not all plants reproduce with flowers, of course. Ferns, mosses, and many algae use spores instead of seeds. These tiny reproductive units are produced in staggering numbers and scattered by wind or water. Some ferns produce millions of spores in a single growing season, banking on probability rather than packaging. Gymnosperms, like pines and firs, also do things a bit differently. They don't produce flowers but instead rely on cones. Male cones release pollen, which is carried by the wind to female cones. It's less targeted than using pollinators, but in forests filled with the same species, it works well enough. And then there are plants that skip sexual reproduction altogether. Many reproduce asexually, sending out runners, tubers, or bulbs to create clones of themselves. Strawberries, potatoes, and garlic all do this. It's fast, efficient, and guarantees offspring identical to the parent. In stable environments, it's a winning strategy. Some species combine strategies. They may flower and produce seeds while also sending out runners or bulbils. This kind of reproductive belt and braces approach ensures survival across a range of conditions. If one method fails, another might succeed. Even more intriguingly, some plants change their reproductive tactics depending on the environment. A plant might reproduce sexually in good years, when pollinators are abundant and conditions are favourable, and switch to asexual methods during stressful times. It's a remarkable flexibility for something rooted in place. Plant reproduction may lack the drama of animal courtship. No peacocks, no serenades, no territorial duels, but it more than makes up for it in diversity, ingenuity, and sheer persistence. Flowers may look delicate, but they're strategic powerhouses. Seeds may seem simple, but they're time-travelling vessels of genetic potential, and the whole system is finely tuned to the rhythms of seasons, climate, and community. Perhaps what's most inspiring is the way plants approach reproduction with quiet resilience. They don't rush, they don't push, they time their efforts carefully, sometimes waiting years for the right moment. And when that moment comes, they bloom, disperse, and begin again. Quietly, confidently, and with breathtaking creativity. So next time you walk through a meadow or a forest, or even your own garden, take a moment to consider the stories unfolding around you. That dandelion puff drifting on the breeze, it's a single chapter in an ancient narrative. That tomato on your salad, a carefully packaged bundle of seeds wrapped in evolutionary marketing. And that oak tree dropping acorns, a master of patience, placing bets on the future with each and every nut. Plants have been perfecting the art of reproduction for over 400 million years, and their legacy surrounds us in every seed, every sprout, every flower. It's not just biology, it's quiet brilliance in bloom, somewhere in a laboratory, tucked behind flasks, grow lights, and a suspiciously content-looking philodendron, a quiet revolution is taking place. While many of us know plants as garden inhabitants, salad components, or the thing we keep forgetting to water in the corner of the living room, scientists have come to see them as something more, a gateway to solving some of humanity's biggest challenges. Plants are not just passive greenery, they're complex biological powerhouses with talents that range from air purification to solar energy conversion. And as we learn more about their inner workings, we're finding that the secret life of plants holds immense potential for the future of science, technology, medicine, and even space travel. Let's start with a favourite subject of environmentally conscious minds everywhere: climate change. Plants have been quietly managing carbon dioxide for hundreds of millions of years. Through the process of photosynthesis, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and convert it into sugars, releasing oxygen in the process. Forests, grasslands, and oceans full of phytoplankton act as enormous carbon sinks, natural systems that absorb more carbon than they emit. But scientists are now exploring ways to enhance this natural capacity. Through genetic engineering and selective breeding, researchers are developing super plants that can grow faster, absorb more carbon, or store it deeper in the soil. One example is modifying the root systems of crops so that more carbon stays underground, potentially locking it away for years or even centuries. It's a kind of botanical bank account, sequestering carbon safely out of atmospheric circulation. There's also work being done to optimize the photosynthesis process itself. While photosynthesis is miraculous, it's not particularly efficient. Only a small fraction of the sunlight a plant captures ends up as usable energy. Scientists are experimenting with ways to tweak the biochemical pathway of photosynthesis to increase that efficiency. If successful, such improvements could lead to faster growing crops that require less land, less water, and fewer chemical inputs, helping to feed a growing global population without exhausting natural resources. And speaking of food, let's talk about agriculture, because plants, after all, are the foundation of every dinner plate. Modern farming faces a laundry list of challenges: climate unpredictability, soil degradation, water scarcity, and increasing demand from a swelling population. But once again, plants may be part of the solution. One promising area of research is vertical farming and controlled environment agriculture. These systems allow crops to be grown indoors, stacked in layers, and carefully monitored using sensors, automation, and LED lighting tuned to exactly the right wavelengths. Crops grow faster, use less water, and require no pesticides. And since the farms can be located in cities or harsh environments, they reduce the need for long-distance transportation. Imagine fresh strawberries grown in a skyscraper in the middle of a desert. Thanks to plant science, that's not science fiction anymore. There's also growing interest in perennial crops, plants that don't need to be replanted every year. Most of our major food crops, like wheat, rice, and corn, are annuals. That means farmers have to plough, sow, fertilise and harvest from scratch every season. Perennials, on the other hand, stay in the ground year after year, reducing erosion, improving soil health, and requiring fewer inputs. Scientists are working on developing perennial versions of staple crops, which could lead to more sustainable agriculture systems around the world. But plants aren't just about food, they're medicine cabinets too. Over 50% of modern pharmaceuticals have their origins in compounds found in plants. From aspirin, which traces its roots to willow bark, to cancer-fighting drugs derived from the Madagascar periwinkle, plants have been quietly saving lives for centuries. And researchers continue to search the plant kingdom for new cures. In the rainforests of the Amazon, the jungles of Southeast Asia, and even the forests of the Pacific Northwest, undiscovered plant species may hold the keys to treating diseases we haven't even heard of yet. Ethnobotanists, scientists who study how people use plants in traditional medicine, work closely with indigenous communities to learn about these remedies, combining ancient knowledge with modern laboratory tools to identify active ingredients and bring them to the world. But we don't have to go to the jungle to find plant innovation. In fact, some of it is happening in test tubes. Synthetic biology, a field that combines biology and engineering, is allowing scientists to redesign plants from the inside out. By inserting or editing specific genes, researchers can create plants that glow, produce vaccines, or clean up toxic waste. One exciting example is phytoremediation, the use of plants to clean up environmental pollutants. Certain species, like sunflowers and poplar trees, are particularly good at absorbing heavy metals, radioactive materials, and other toxins from soil and water. These green vacuums have been used to help clean up areas affected by industrial spills and nuclear disasters, offering a sustainable and cost-effective alternative to mechanical cleanup methods. Other scientists are exploring ways to use plants as biofactories. Imagine a field of tobacco plants genetically engineered to produce life-saving drugs instead of nicotine, or rice plants that contain additional nutrients to help prevent malnutrition. These innovations are still being refined, but they represent a future where farming doesn't just mean growing food. It could also mean growing medicine, vaccines, or even biodegradable plastics. And then there's the question of space. As we look toward the moon, Mars, and beyond, we're going to need to bring a little green with us. Plants are key to life support systems in space because they recycle carbon dioxide, produce oxygen, and can provide food for astronauts. NASA and other space agencies have been studying how plants grow in zero gravity, under artificial lighting, and in confined environments. Experiments aboard the International Space Station have shown that plants can adapt surprisingly well to microgravity. Lettuce, radishes, zinnias, and wheat have all been successfully grown in orbit, and it turns out that watching a flower bloom in space is good for more than just oxygen. It's good for morale. There's something psychologically comforting about greenery, especially when you're millions of miles from Earth. In the future, self-sustaining habitats on Mars or the Moon will likely include greenhouses filled with crops, carefully monitored by sensors and maybe even managed by robotic gardeners. Researchers are already developing soil substitutes that simulate Martian regolith, testing which plant varieties can thrive in low-light, low-pressure conditions. It's a slow process, but it's a necessary one. Because when you're building a future off-world, a potato might be more valuable than a spaceship. Back on Earth, plants are being woven into the infrastructure of cities. Urban planners and architects are incorporating living walls, green roofs, and tree-lined streets not just for aesthetics, but for their tangible benefits. Trees cool the air through transpiration, reduce noise pollution, sequester carbon, and improve mental health. Rooftop gardens help manage stormwater runoff and insulate buildings, reducing energy use. In the age of climate anxiety, cities that embrace green space aren't just more beautiful, they're more resilient. And then there's the cultural and emotional role of plants. Botanical gardens, houseplants, and even the humble backyard veggie patch offer a sense of connection to nature. Studies show that spending time around plants can lower cortisol levels, improve concentration, and boost mood. During challenging times, like, say, a global pandemic, people turn to gardening not just for food security, but for comfort and control. Plants have been with us since the beginning. They gave us the oxygen we breathe, the food we eat, the medicine we rely on, and the materials we use to build our lives. And now, they're helping us design our future, cleaner, greener, more sustainable, and perhaps even interplanetary. What makes plants so astonishing is not just their quiet beauty or their ancient lineage, but their versatility. They are chemical engineers, energy converters, environmental cleaners, architects of ecosystems, and silent healers. Their talents stretch from the rainforest canopy to the cold vacuum of space. So as we move forward into an age of biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and global transformation, it's worth remembering that some of the most powerful tools at our disposal are still the ones with roots, leaves, and chloroplasts. We've spent centuries studying them, cultivating them, and sometimes taking them for granted. But it seems clear now, the future is going to be a lot more plant-shaped than we imagined. And that's a very good thing, because whether it's a sunflower following the arc of the sun, a lab-grown rice plant enhanced to resist drought, or a tiny lettuce leaf floating aboard a space station, each one is a little green miracle, part of a story still unfolding, still growing, still reaching for the light. We often look at plants and think of them as background characters, scenery to the main event, the green blur behind all the animal drama. But the more we learn about them, the more we realize that plants are not just silent witnesses to life. They are life, and they're not just sitting around being photosynthetic. They're responding, interacting, learning, and evolving in ways that blur the line between instinct and something that, if you squint just right, almost looks like intelligence. Now, to be clear, plants don't have brains. They don't think or feel in any way that resembles human consciousness, but they do process information. They gather it constantly, from light, gravity, chemicals, touch, and even sound, and they respond in complex, often surprisingly adaptive ways. This has led scientists to propose the idea of plant intelligence, not as a poetic metaphor, but as a real biological concept. Let's begin with something familiar: movement. Most of us think of plants as immobile, but given the right time scale, they're anything but. Plants move toward light. They twist around support structures. They open and close in response to touch, temperature, and humidity. These movements are often the result of growth responses, like a stem bending toward a window or a vine coiling around a trellis. But in some cases, the movements are rapid, like the famous snap of the Venus flytrap or the folding of a sensitive mimosa. These responses are highly specific and coordinated. When a Venus flytrap's trigger hairs are touched, the plant doesn't just clamp down immediately, it counts. It waits for a second touch within a certain window of time before activating the trap. This double trigger mechanism helps reduce false alarms. That's not just a reflex, that's a decision-making process, albeit a simple one. But decision-making is just the start. Plants can also learn. One famous experiment involved the sensitive plant Mimosa pudica, which closes its leaves when touched, a clear defense mechanism. In a study, researchers repeatedly dropped the plants from a short height, a non-damaging but startling experience. At first, the plants closed their leaves in response, but after several repetitions, they stopped responding. They had learned that this particular stimulus wasn't harmful. Even more intriguingly, when tested days, or even weeks later, the plants still remembered. They didn't close their leaves when dropped. That's not memory in a human sense, but it is a form of retained response to a learned experience. Now, if that's not enough to make you raise an eyebrow at the notion of plant intelligence, consider that plants can also make trade-offs. When under attack by herbivores, some plants reduce their investment in reproduction and divert resources to defense, producing more toxins or thicker leaves. Others, faced with crowding by nearby plants, will change their growth angle, growing taller or bending sideways to escape shade. These are strategic choices, influenced by information from the environment. Again, no brain. Just distributed intelligence, spread out across cells, tissues, and root systems. And speaking of roots, those subterranean explorers are where a lot of this processing happens. Roots are sensitive to gravity, moisture, pressure, and even chemical gradients. They don't just grow randomly, they forage. They sample the soil and grow toward pockets of water or nutrients. They avoid toxins and navigate around obstacles. Some studies suggest that roots can even detect the presence of other roots nearby and adjust their growth to avoid competition, or, in the case of kin, to allow cooperation. Roots are also key players in communication. Through the mycorrhizal networks, the so-called Wood Wide Web, plants can send and receive chemical messages, alerting one another to threats like insect attacks or drought. These messages often result in the receiving plant boosting its own defenses before the threat even arrives. That's not just passive signaling, that's proactive behavior. But communication doesn't stop underground. Plants release volatile organic compounds into the air that can act as distress calls or attractors. A plant being chewed by caterpillars might emit a scent that not only warns neighbouring plants, but attracts parasitic wasps to deal with the pests. The complexity of these chemical signals is astonishing. Different blends for different attackers, even modified by the plant's previous experiences. Some researchers have gone a step further, suggesting that plants might even have something akin to a nervous system. Not in the traditional sense. There are no neurons, no synapses, but plants do use electrical signals to transmit information. When a Venus flytrap closes, or when a wound occurs, electrical impulses known as action potentials travel through the plant. These signals move more slowly than in animals, but they can coordinate responses across the organism. For example, if one part of a plant is injured, distant tissues may begin producing defense compounds before the attackers arrive. There's even emerging evidence that plants can detect and respond to sound. In laboratory conditions, roots have been shown to grow toward the sound of running water, even when no moisture is present. Other studies suggest that plants may alter gene expression in response to certain frequencies of sound. It's not yet clear how plants detect these vibrations, perhaps through mechanosensitive proteins, but the possibility that they can hear in a broad sense is one more layer of intrigue. All of this leads us to a philosophical question. What is intelligence? If we define it as the ability to solve problems, respond to the environment, and adapt to new challenges, then plants certainly qualify. Their intelligence is not centralized like a brain. It's decentralized, modular, and highly specialized. Each part of a plant gathers and processes information relevant to its role. Leaves monitor light and gas exchange, roots assess soil conditions, flowers respond to pollinator visits. In this way, a plant behaves more like a network than a single organism. It's a living system of sensors and responders, constantly adjusting to optimize survival. And perhaps most remarkably, it does all of this without moving from its spot. Imagine if you had to live your whole life in one place, with no ability to relocate when conditions got tough. You'd have to be very good at sensing, adjusting, and optimizing. That's what plants do every moment of every day. This redefinition of intelligence isn't just academic. It's changing the way we approach plant science. Researchers are using models from artificial intelligence and computer networks to study plant signaling systems. Some are even building robots based on plant behavior. The idea is that by understanding how plants solve problems without a brain, we might find new approaches to designing intelligent systems in our own technologies. Plants are also inspiring new ways of thinking about sustainability. After all, they operate on entirely renewable energy, recycle their own waste, and cooperate with others to survive. They've been doing circular economy long before it was cool, and they do it all in a way that maintains balance in ecosystems, fosters biodiversity, and builds soil rather than depleting it. But perhaps the most humbling lesson from plant intelligence is this. Awareness doesn't require consciousness. A plant doesn't need to know it's alive to behave as if it is. It doesn't need to feel pain to avoid harm, or experience joy to seek light. Its responses are no less sophisticated just because they arise from chemistry and structure rather than emotion. This challenges our assumptions. We're used to seeing intelligence as something tied to movement, noise, or expression. But plants remind us that intelligence can be slow, silent, and deeply rooted. That awareness can be measured not in seconds, but in seasons. So the next time you pass by a tree or tend to a potted herb, pause for a moment. You're not just looking at a passive being, you're looking at an organism that's monitoring its environment, calculating trade-offs, forming partnerships, and executing strategies for survival. You're looking at a being that, in its own quiet way, is thinking, just not like you do. In a world that often prizes quick reactions and loud voices, plants offer a different kind of wisdom. A slower pace, a deeper awareness, a way of being that's not about dominance or display, but about listening, adapting and enduring. They are not just part of life, they are life expressed in green, in patience, in presence. And as we learn more about them, we may find that the line between us and them is less rigid than we thought. Intelligence comes in many forms, and some of it is leafy, photosynthetic, and rooted right beneath our feet. At first glance, it might seem like the story of plants is a quiet one. No roars or howls, no thundering hooves or flashing teeth. But spend just a little time among them, whether it's in a forest, a garden, a windswept field, or the potted jungle on your windowsill, and you'll begin to sense something deeper. Plants are not just living beings, they are storytellers, and their stories are etched into landscapes, woven through history, and embedded in every breath we take. From the oxygen in the air to the food on our plates, from the clothes we wear to the medicines we rely on, plants are central characters in the human saga. And, increasingly, they're shaping the story of our future. Let's begin with something incredibly basic: air. Every molecule of oxygen you breathe was made by plants, or by their ancient aquatic cousins, photosynthetic algae. Billions of years ago, tiny cyanobacteria started releasing oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis. Over time, this transformed Earth's atmosphere, making it rich in the oxygen that complex life requires. The world as we know it, full of animals, fungi, and yes, people, simply wouldn't exist without that quiet planetary makeover led by plants. So every breath you take is, in a very literal sense, a thank you note to photosynthesis. Then there's the matter of food. It's easy to forget in the age of supermarkets and snack aisles that nearly every bite we eat begins with plants. Either we eat them directly, fruits, grains, vegetables, nuts, or we eat animals that ate plants. Plants are the base of nearly every food chain, the primary producers that convert sunlight into energy and nutrients. A single stalk of wheat or kernel of corn might not seem like much, but multiplied by billions, they form the foundation of global civilization. Consider rice. It's been cultivated for over 10,000 years and today feeds more than half the world's population. Then there's wheat, the backbone of bread, pasta and pastries, and corn, which might masquerade as popcorn or sweet kernels at a barbecue, but also hides in everything from cooking oil to soft drinks to biodegradable plastics. These plants are more than crops. They're cultural icons, economic powerhouses, and essential threads in the fabric of daily life. But food is just the beginning. Take a quick inventory of your surroundings. The cotton shirt you're wearing? That's a plant. The wooden table, the paper in your notebook, the tea leaves steeping in your mug, all from plants. Even the walls of your home, if they're made of timber, or the paint on them, or the rubber in your shoes. Plants, plants, and more plants. They don't just fill space, they build it. Medicinally, plants are our oldest allies. Long before chemistry was a science, it was a practice of observation and herbal tradition. From willow bark, people learned to treat pain, eventually isolating salicin, the basis for aspirin. From the Pacific yew came Taxol, a powerful anti-cancer agent. From rosy periwinkle, drugs that revolutionized the treatment of leukemia. Every rainforest, every meadow, every forgotten hedgerow may contain compounds that haven't yet been discovered, chemical stories waiting to be read. And beyond their practical uses, plants are deeply embedded in human culture. Olive branches as symbols of peace, the lotus as a metaphor for purity and rebirth, the oak as a symbol of strength and endurance. Every culture on earth has its sacred trees, its ceremonial plants, its healing herbs and poetic flowers. They're woven into myths and folklore, religious rites and seasonal festivals. In some cases, entire philosophies have grown from observing the life cycle of a tree or the opening of a flower. The Japanese concept of hanami, for example, celebrates the fleeting beauty of cherry blossoms. In that brief bloom lies a meditation on impermanence, change, and the beauty of the present moment. In India, the tulsi plant is revered in homes as both a deity and a healer. In Celtic traditions, groves of trees were considered sacred, natural temples where the divine could be encountered. Plants in these contexts are not just useful, they are meaningful, and they're also musical. Instruments like flutes, drums, and violins are made from plant materials. Wood carries sound in a way that plastic never could, and of course, many songs and poems have been inspired by the whisper of the wind in the trees, the rustling of leaves, or the perfume of a night-blooming flower. Plants don't just shape our physical world, they shape our imagination. But despite all this, it's easy to overlook them. Part of the challenge is that plants operate on a different timescale than we do. Their changes are subtle, their gestures slow. A tree might take 50 years to reach maturity and live for centuries after that. A flower might open over the course of hours, a root system might expand over years. To see plants clearly, we have to slow down, we have to pay attention, and in doing so, we often discover something else, a profound sense of calm, curiosity, and connection. This connection is more than emotional, it's biological. Studies show that spending time among plants reduces stress, lowers blood pressure, and improves concentration. Hospital patients recover faster when they can see greenery from their windows. Children who play in natural environments tend to be more creative and resilient. Even office workers surrounded by indoor plants report greater satisfaction and well-being. This makes perfect sense when you think about our evolutionary history. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in close contact with plants, not just for food and shelter, but for beauty, scent, and orientation. Recognizing edible berries, spotting medicinal herbs, noticing seasonal changes in leaves, these skills were part of daily survival. And even now, somewhere deep in our brains, we respond to green spaces with a sigh of relief. The presence of plants is, for many of us, a sign that things are okay. Which brings us to perhaps the most urgent part of the story, the future. As our planet faces climate change, habitat loss, and declining biodiversity, the role of plants becomes more critical than ever. Forests are not just home to animals, they are carbon sinks, climate regulators, and water managers. Wetlands filter pollutants and buffer coastlines. Grasses hold soil in place and support pollinators. In every ecosystem, plants are the infrastructure, the foundation on which everything else rests. And yet, plant species are disappearing at an alarming rate. Many vanish without ever being formally described. Some could hold the key to curing disease or stabilizing degraded lands. Others simply play roles we haven't yet understood. The loss of plant biodiversity is not just an aesthetic or scientific tragedy. It's a real threat to the stability of ecosystems, economies, and communities. But there's hope. Around the world, people are working to protect and restore plant life. Indigenous communities are safeguarding traditional plant knowledge. Seed banks are preserving rare and heirloom varieties. Ecologists are rewilding degraded landscapes with native flora. And everyday people, gardeners, teachers, artists and students, are reconnecting with the green world through community gardens, houseplants, and forest walks. Technology, too, is playing a part. From satellite imagery that monitors forest cover, to genetic tools that help conserve rare species, to hydroponic systems that grow food in deserts and cities, we're finding new ways to support plant life even as we face unprecedented challenges. And all of this begins with awareness, with noticing the plant outside your window, with wondering why that leaf is shaped the way it is, with listening, really listening to what the natural world is telling us. Plants may not speak our language, but they are always in conversation with their surroundings. If we take the time to observe, we can learn to read their signals, respond to their needs, and perhaps even be changed by their quiet wisdom. Because in the end, the story of plants is not separate from ours. It is our story. It is the breath we share, the food we eat, the places we live, and the thoughts we think. It is the shade under which we rest, the bloom that marks celebration, the root that connects all living things. It is a story written in green, growing all around us, asking only that we notice it. So wherever you are right now, on a forest trail, in a city apartment, near a garden or far from one, pause for a moment. Find a plant, any plant. It might be a towering tree or a humble weed pushing through the cracks. Look at it closely. Let yourself feel that ancient connection. Because in its leaves, its roots, its slow unfolding life is a story older than humanity, and one that's still being written with every sunrise, every seed, and every stretch toward the light. And so, after drifting through chloroplasts and root tips, secret scents and snapping traps, we find ourselves back where we began, marveling at the silent, intricate, astonishing world of plants. What started as a simple exploration of green things has revealed something far more profound. These quiet beings, so often overlooked or reduced to decor, are among the most adaptable, essential, and fascinating life forms on Earth. They don't just survive, they shape worlds. They don't speak in words, but their language is written in sunlight, scent, movement, and memory. We've uncovered how they breathe for us, feed us, heal us, and inspire us. We've seen their cunning strategies, their hidden communication, their moments of brilliance in the darkness of night and the blaze of day. They defend themselves, outsmart predators, plan for the future, and even, in their own slow way, learn from experience. They build the very ecosystems that cradle life, and now, perhaps more than ever, they hold some of the keys to humanity's path forward. So, with all of this in mind, are you still awake? If you are, I hope it's not because I was too interesting, though if I was, well, at least you've learned a few things about your leafy roommates along the way. And if you're already halfway to dreamland, may your thoughts be filled with forests that whisper, and vines that stretch slowly across starlit skies. Before you drift off completely, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment and share. Are you surrounded by houseplants, garden greenery, or maybe a cozy cactus on your nightstand? And if you found this gentle journey into the world of plants relaxing or informative, or both, please do consider giving this video a like and subscribing to The Sleepy Scientist. It's a small gesture that helps me keep bringing you more calming, curious content from the natural world and beyond. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the secret life of plants. Sleep well, dream deep, and don't forget, the world is blooming all around you, quietly, patiently, beautifully. You just have to slow down to see it.